Hey everyone, and welcome to Nighttime Stories. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, get comfortable and relax. It started with that horrible sound from my phone, the emergency alert tone that feels like it shakes something inside your chest. I came out of sleep in a jolt, heart hammering, and reached blindly for the phone on my nightstand. The screen lit the room in red. I squinted at the words, not even sure I was awake at first. Do not answer knocks at your door. They are not police. Stay inside. Do not engage. For a few long seconds I just stared at it, my head heavy with the kind of fog you only have when you wake up too suddenly. The words did not fit together right. I thought maybe it was some kind of glitch, one of those mistaken alerts that sometimes make the news, like when they say a missile is incoming by accident. But as soon as I thought that, I heard it. 3 sharp knocks from downstairs, hollow and precise, echoing through the wood. I froze where I was in bed, sheets tangled around my legs. My first thought was maybe it was coincidence. Maybe the alert had nothing to do with the sound, but my chest tightened and I could feel each beat of my heart thudding in my throat. I held my breath, straining to listen, my eyes darting around the dark room. Nothing followed, just silence. The air in the house felt heavier, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every small sound. I could hear the refrigerator downstairs humming faintly and the tick of the hallway clock. My own breath sounded too loud. I wanted to believe it was some random late-night visitor, but the alert sat burning in my head. Do not answer knocks at your door. They are not police. I swung my legs out of bed and stood slowly, my body trembling in ways I could not control. I padded over to the window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. The street outside was still, dimly lit by a single street lamp that flickered every few seconds. And there it was, sitting right in front of my house. A police cruiser, idling silently, headlights dimmed but running lights on. For a moment my fear melted into confusion. Why would there be an alert telling us not to trust police if a cruiser was right there? Maybe it was a real officer checking on people. Maybe there had been break-ins and they were warning us about imposters. But the message had been clear. They are not police. I looked down at the porch and saw the man standing there. He looked the part completely. Dark uniform, reflective patches, a badge that glinted under the porch light, and a flashlight held loosely in one hand. His posture was steady, calm, the way you would expect from an officer doing a routine check. But something about the way he stood was off. He was too still, like he was waiting for a cue. And every few seconds he tilted his head slightly to the side, the motion sharp and unnatural, like he was listening for something I could not hear. Then, as if he had sensed me, he lifted his chin and looked straight up at my window. My stomach dropped like I had been yanked off a ledge. His eyes found mine in the dark even though I had not made a sound and the curtain had barely moved. It felt impossible, like he had been waiting for me to appear. My first instinct was to duck away, but I was frozen there, breath locked in my throat, skin prickling with cold sweat. The porch light buzzed once and dimmed, just for a second, and in that moment, I thought I saw his face flicker too. Not change exactly, but ripple, like a reflection in disturbed water. It was gone before I could blink, and when the light steadied, he was just standing there again, perfectly dressed, perfectly still. The silence dragged on, stretching the moment into something unbearable. I finally backed away from the window, pulling the curtain closed with shaking hands. My legs felt weak, the floor cold under my bare feet. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone, still glowing red on the nightstand. Do not answer knocks. Do not engage. The words looped in my head like a broken record. Another knock came, slower this time, heavier. The sound rattled up the stairs and through my ribs. I flinched hard enough that my teeth clacked. Then came the voice. It carried clearly through the door and up the stairwell. Police, open up. The tone was flat, too drawn out, like a bad recording played through cheap speakers. Every instinct in me screamed that it was wrong. Real police announce themselves in sharp, clipped voices. They sound urgent, commanding. This was none of that. This was a word stretched too long. echoing with a strange warble like it did not quite fit in a human throat. I wanted to run to my sister's room down the hall, to make sure she was awake, to tell her not to go near the door, but my legs would not move. I sat there in the dark, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles ached, listening to the sound of that voice repeating the same words again. "Police, open up." The cruiser outside idled with no sound of an engine. The man on the porch did not move, he only waited. And I understood then that the alert had not been an accident. It had been for us. Whatever was outside the door was not here to help, and if I opened it, I would not come back inside. The clock in the hall ticked once, twice. The knock came again, harder this time, rattling the door in its frame. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. I sat perfectly still, every muscle tight, the words of the alert echoing louder in my head than the knocking itself. "Do not answer. They are not police. Do not engage." And in that moment, I believed it with everything I had. I sat on the edge of my bed, gripping the phone until my hands hurt. The red glow had finally faded, but the words of the alert were burned into my eyes. I could still see them every time I blinked. "Do not answer knocks. They are not police. Stay inside. Do not engage." The voice downstairs repeated again, low and flat. "Police, open the door." Each word stretched too long, like someone unfamiliar with speech was trying to mimic the sound of it. I slid off the bed and moved quietly into the hallway, careful not to let the floorboards creak. My sister's room was just across from mine, her door shut. I wanted to wake her, to pull her into my room and hide, but I did not know how to explain without her panicking. Another knock shook the front door, 3 hollow raps that sent vibrations through the floor beneath my feet. She stirred inside her room. I heard her bed creak, and I whispered her name softly, urging her not to open the door if she heard anything. I pressed my ear against the wood and whispered again, firmer this time. I think she heard me because she did not respond, just quieted down. I turned back toward the stairs and crept down a few steps until I had a view of the entryway. The frosted glass of the front door glowed faintly with the porch light behind it. A silhouette stood there, a broad figure in what looked like a uniform. The beam of his flashlight cut across the door, flashing once, then going still. He did not fidget or shift weight like a person would. He just stood perfectly still, shoulders square, head tilted slightly to the side as though he was listening to the house breathe. My pulse roared in my ears. Every instinct told me to run back upstairs, but I could not tear my eyes away from the figure. The knock came again, softer this time, almost polite, and the voice followed. "Police, open the door." It was the same warped cadence as before. It sounded close but distant at the same time, like it was coming through a tunnel. I forced myself to move back upstairs, my hands trembling on the banister. I went into my room and pulled the curtain back just enough to look down at the cruiser in the street. The car idled in the same place, headlights low, but when I focused on it, I noticed details that made my stomach tighten. The license plate had no numbers, just a blank metal rectangle glinting under the streetlight. The reflective stripes along the doors looked printed on, like decals instead of paint, and the engine was silent. No rumble, no exhaust, just stillness. The man on the porch tilted his head again, sharper this time, until it looked unnatural, his ear almost touching his shoulder. Then, without warning, he snapped his face up toward my window again. His eyes found me instantly, even through the darkness and the narrow slit in the curtain. I stumbled back, letting the fabric fall shut, my breath catching hard in my chest. How could he see me? I had not moved the curtain enough to make a sound. I pressed myself against the wall, heart racing, hands clammy against the plaster. I wanted to call the police, the real police, but what if the line connected me to the same voice outside? What if whoever had sent the alert was the only real authority left? The thought made my head spin. Another knock echoed through the house, harder now, rattling the glass in the frame. "Police, open the door." The words were louder, but the same wrong cadence, too slow and too flat. The repetition scraped against my nerves. I knew real officers would announce themselves differently, call out with urgency, maybe shout our names. This voice sounded like someone practicing from a script and not doing it well. Across the street, movement caught my eye through the slit of curtain. Mr. Carlson's porch light flicked on. The old man shuffled out in his robe, muttering as he opened his door a crack. The figure on his porch looked identical to the one outside mine. Same uniform, same flashlight, same stillness. My chest tightened as I watched Mr. Carlson peer out, confused but unafraid. He probably thought he was helping, or that there had been a disturbance in the neighborhood. I wanted to scream for him to shut the door, to run, but I could not make a sound. My throat locked up as the uniformed figure stepped forward, pushing the door open wider with one hand. Carlson seemed to protest, his arms rising, but the officer moved past him into the house. I held my breath, waiting for something normal to happen, some explanation. Instead, after a long minute of silence, a scream tore through the night. It was the kind of sound that freezes your blood, raw, desperate, and cut short all at once. Carlson's voice, broken in terror, ended as suddenly as it began. My whole body went rigid. I clamped a hand over my sister's door so she would not open it, though she had not even tried. I stood there trembling, listening as the officer stepped back onto the porch. Through the curtain, I watched him walk calmly down the steps. His hands glinted wet in the porch light. He raised one to his chest and wiped it across the dark fabric of his uniform, smearing something that looked too dark to be water. Then he turned, and even though I was hidden behind the curtain, I felt him looking directly at my window again. I stumbled back, my legs weak, the room tilting around me. The cruiser outside shifted in the street, headlights dimming for a moment before steadying again. I counted my breaths, each one sharp and shallow, trying not to make noise. My mind raced with explanations, but none of them fit. Whatever that thing was, it was not a police officer, and it had just walked out of Carlson's house alone. The knock came again downstairs, 3 sharp raps, then the voice. "Police, open the door." It was louder now, stronger, as though it knew I had seen too much. My skin crawled, every nerve screaming at me to hide. I backed into my sister's room, shutting the door softly behind me. She sat upright in bed, eyes wide, clutching her blanket. "What's happening?" she whispered. I knelt beside her, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Do not make a sound. Do not open your door for anyone." She nodded quickly, tears brimming in her eyes. I hugged her tightly, listening as the knock echoed again through the house, followed by that wrong, drawn-out voice repeating the same words over and over. "Police, open the door." I held her close, the truth solid in my chest now. Whatever was outside, it was not here to protect us, and the alert had not been a mistake. The knocking had stopped for a while, though the silence it left behind felt worse. I sat on the floor beside my sister's bed, listening for the smallest sound, afraid even my breathing was too loud. Every board in the house seemed to creak more than usual, and the hum of the refrigerator downstairs might as well have been a siren. I pressed my ear against the floor, trying to hear if the figure on the porch had left, but there was nothing, just the faint buzz of the porch light through the wood. I thought maybe it had moved on, maybe whatever it was had given up, but when I peeked through the curtain of my room again, the cruiser was still there. It sat in the middle of the street with its lights faintly glowing, but the engine gave off no sound, no plume of exhaust in the cold air. The man in uniform was gone from my porch, but I knew he was not far. My body tensed with that animal sense you cannot explain, the certainty of being watched. Across the street, Mr. Carlson's door still hung half open, his porch light shining into an empty hallway. I could not see him, could not hear him, and the scream I had heard earlier replayed in my mind like a stuck record. The figure that had gone inside came back out again, as though nothing had happened, wiping its hands on its uniform like it had just finished a chore. My stomach twisted. I wanted to call the police, the real police, but every time I reached for my phone, the warning replayed in my head. They are not police. What if the line connected me to one of them? What if they were already on the other end, waiting for me to reach out? At 1:30, headlights flickered further down the street. Another cruiser rolled in, then another and another. They pulled up silently, one after another, until 4 of them lined the road. Each was identical to the one already parked. Same blank license plates, same painted stripes that seemed too flat. The red and blue lights spun faintly, casting flashes across the neighborhood, but there were no sirens. No sound but the faint hum of the bulbs inside my house. The figures stepped out of the cruisers in unison. 4, then 6, then 8. Each wore the same uniform, the same polished shoes, the same belt. At first glance, they looked convincing, but the longer I stared, the more the details pulled apart. Their smiles looked printed, stretched too evenly across their faces. Their cheeks were too smooth, no stubble, no lines, like mannequins, and every few steps, their heads would tilt sharply, as if listening to some signal none of us could hear. I whispered for my sister to stay put and crept back toward the stairs, crouching low so the windows would not show my silhouette. The knock came again, this time from the neighbor's house 2 doors down. I peeked through the blinds and watched as one of the figures stepped onto the porch. It raised its hand and rapped 3 times, precise, each knock spaced exactly the same. Then it spoke. "Police, open the door." The words dragged too long, stretched and heavy. The voice sounded as though it had been recorded badly and played through old speakers. My neighbor cracked his blinds to peek, just as I had done, and the figure snapped its head toward the window immediately, eyes locking onto him. My neighbor jerked back, and the blinds fell shut. The figure tilted its head again, then repeated the same line. "Police, open the door." I crouched lower, pressing myself against the wall, pulse slamming in my ears. My sister padded softly down the hallway behind me, her small hand grabbing my arm. I wanted to yell at her to go back, but the fear in her eyes stopped me. She whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "They sound wrong." I nodded slowly. She had heard it too. Minutes stretched like hours. We sat frozen, listening as the knocks moved from house to house. Always 3 raps, always the same line. Some people resisted, some stayed silent, but eventually someone else gave in. A door creaked open halfway down the street. I pressed my eye to the crack in the blinds and watched as another neighbor, half dressed in pajamas, stepped outside with confusion written all over his face. He gestured with his hands, talking fast, probably asking what was going on. The officer stepped closer. The man's words grew louder, sharper, but I could not make them out through the glass. Suddenly, the figure's arm snapped forward, far too fast, far too sharp, grabbing the man by the shoulder. His body stiffened instantly. His mouth opened in a scream that never finished, cut short as the figure yanked him into the dark between houses. His slippers clattered against the porch as they dragged him out of sight. The air seemed to fold around them, and then it was silent again. My sister buried her face into my sleeve to stifle a sob. I pulled her close, whispering that we had to stay quiet no matter what. My own body shook so badly, I could hardly keep the curtain closed. The figures began spreading out, 2 by 2, moving in perfect sync. They crossed lawns without hesitation, their flashlights cutting deliberate lines through the dark. None of them spoke unless they were at a door, and when they did, the voice was always the same. "Police, open the door." Slow, warped, wrong. I ducked low and pulled my sister with me into the hallway. I knew it was only a matter of time before they came back to our house. We had been lucky the first time, when I had not answered, but would they try again? Would they wait us out? The air in the house felt too thin. Every bulb buzzed louder, the hum filling my skull. I dragged my sister into my room and locked the door, though I knew it would not stop anything. We huddled by the bed, the phone clutched in my hand, waiting for another alert, for something that told us what to do next. At 1:45, the knock returned. 3 sharp raps against the front door. Then the voice, deeper this time, as though pushing harder. "Police, open the door." The words vibrated through the floorboards. My sister whimpered, and I clamped a hand gently over her mouth, whispering for her to stay quiet. The knock came again, harder, rattling the glass. "Police, open the door." Every light in the house flickered at once. For a moment, The shadows in the corners stretched too far, bending wrong. I held my breath, waiting for the bulbs to steady. When they did, the silence returned. The figure on the porch did not leave. It just stood there, waiting. I realized then that the emergency alert had not been exaggerating. It had not been a test or a glitch. These things were moving through our neighborhood, one house at a time, and no one who opened the door came back out. I sat there in the dark, holding my sister against me, and made myself a promise. No matter how long they knocked, no matter what voices they tried to use, I would not open the door. I would not let them in. The silence between the knocks was worse than the knocks themselves. Every time the sound stopped, I sat there holding my sister's hand, waiting for the next one, counting the seconds in my head. Sometimes it came back after only a few moments. Sometimes minutes passed before the hollow thud of knuckles on wood rattled the frame again. Each time it happened, the same voice followed, slow and stretched. "Police, open the door." By 2 a.m, more cruisers had arrived. I stopped counting after 6. They lined the street like a parade, red and blue lights spinning silently, painting the houses in sickly colors. No sirens, no sound of engines, just those lights pulsing against the dark. Figures moved between them, dozens of them, all wearing the same pressed uniforms, all with the same too smooth faces and stiff, tilting heads. They moved together in groups, like actors following a choreographed routine. None of them ever spoke unless they were knocking. I pulled my sister back into my room and closed the door softly. She was shaking so badly I could feel it through her hand. Her face pressed into my sleeve, and she whispered that she had heard Mom's voice downstairs. She swore it had called her name from the front hallway. My blood went cold. Mom had been gone for years, and yet I believed her. The way these things mimicked voices, it was not impossible. I whispered back that it was not real, that she must not listen no matter what. She nodded quickly, but her eyes darted to the dark corners of the room, wide with terror. The knocks outside shifted further down the street. More neighbors gave in. I heard a door slam, voices rise, then the inevitable scream cut short. After each one, the silence thickened until the next knock began. It was like the entire neighborhood was being emptied house by house. I pressed my forehead against the cool wall, fighting to breathe quietly. At 2:15, another alert screamed through my phone, the red glow stabbing into the room. My sister flinched and begged me not to read it, but I had to. I lifted it slowly, hands slick with sweat, and read the words aloud in a whisper. They mimic authority. Do not believe them. Do not answer. Survive until dawn. Survive until dawn. The words hit me harder than the rest. That meant this had a time limit, that maybe if we just made it through the night, the danger would pass. But then doubt slid in, heavy and sharp. What if dawn never came? What if this was not something you could outwait? I shoved the phone under the mattress, unable to look at it anymore. The figures moved closer again. I could hear their synchronized footsteps crunching across lawns, gravel popping beneath their shoes. Their flashlights cut deliberate beams across windows. When one swung past mine, I ducked to the floor and pulled my sister down with me. The beam slid across the curtain, paused, then moved on. My throat tightened, but I stayed perfectly still. At 2:30, I made the decision to get us to the basement. The second floor felt too exposed, too easy for those beams to catch us through the windows. I whispered to my sister to grab her blanket and one of the flashlights. She nodded quickly, clutching both to her chest, and we crept into the hallway. The house groaned faintly under our weight, every creak of the floorboards like a gunshot in the silence. Downstairs, the frosted glass of the front door glowed faintly with the porch light. The silhouette was still there, unmoving, its head tilted sharply again, listening. I pulled my sister toward the kitchen, away from the front door, and eased open the door to the basement stairs. The hinges groaned, and I froze, holding my breath. The knocking stopped. My stomach clenched. Then, from the front door, the voice rose again. "Police, open the door." It was louder now, heavier, as though it was pushing through the walls themselves. My sister whimpered, but I pressed a hand over her mouth and pulled her into the basement, closing the door softly behind us. The basement was colder, the air damp and heavy with the smell of earth. I flipped the switch, and a single bulb hummed to life, casting a weak yellow glow over the concrete floor. We moved quickly, pulling old boxes and a broken chair against the door. I shoved the couch from the basement rec room up against it as well, grunting with effort until it wedged into place. My sister crouched in the corner, flashlight aimed at the door, her small body trembling under the blanket. The knocking started again almost immediately, right above us, rattling the doorframe. The voice followed, deeper and slower than before. "Police, open the door." The wood shook with each hit, dust falling from the ceiling. I pressed my back against the couch, my hands gripping the edge, ready to push harder if the door gave way. The house settled back into silence, but it was not the same silence as before. I could hear them outside now, circling the house, their synchronized footsteps crunching across the gravel and grass. Once in a while, a beam of light cut across the basement windows, making the dust in the air shimmer. Each time it passed, my sister flinched, whispering that they were going to see us, that they already knew we were down here. I held her hand tight, whispering back that we had to stay quiet, that silence was the only shield we had left. At 2:45, the porch light outside buzzed and flickered. Through the basement window, I saw the glow dim, then return, then dim again. When it weakened, the figures pressed closer. Their outlines blurred at the edges, their faces stretching unnaturally in the faint glow. When the light steadied, they froze in place, as if caught mid-motion. I understood then that the light did not stop them, it only slowed them, like shadows shrinking under the sun. But the porch light was old, and it would not hold forever. My sister whispered that she could hear them whispering now, not just the words, "Police, open the door," but other voices, softer, sliding through the walls. She said one of them was Mom's voice again, calling her name, begging her to open up. I told her it was not real, but her eyes filled with tears. She covered her ears and rocked back and forth, mouthing the same words over and over. "Do not answer. Do not answer." The basement bulb flickered once, and the room plunged into darkness for a heartbeat. In that second, I swear I saw something move across the floor, a shape too tall to belong in the room, bending down to fit under the ceiling. When the bulb came back, the space was empty again, but my chest felt tight, as if the air had been sucked out. By 3 o'clock, the neighborhood outside had gone nearly silent. No more screams, no more doors slamming. Just the occasional synchronized footsteps of the figures circling the houses, waiting. The emergency alert had told us to survive until dawn, but sitting in that basement, surrounded by flickering light and walls that seemed too thin, dawn felt impossibly far away. I sat with my back against the couch, holding my sister's hand in the glow of the trembling bulb, and realized something I had been avoiding all night. This was not about waiting out a storm or a power outage. This was something else entirely, something that had already taken the neighborhood and was now pressing against our walls. And the only thing between us and them was the thinnest thread of light. The bulb above us buzzed faintly, its glow already too weak for comfort. My sister sat huddled against the basement wall, clutching her blanket so tight the fabric was twisted into knots. The flashlight rested on her knees, the beam pointed at the couch we had shoved against the door. Her eyes never left that spot. I could not blame her. Every so often the wood shuddered with a hollow thud, like something brushing against it, testing our barricade. I forced myself to move around the room, checking corners, adjusting boxes and chairs to fill the cracks of shadow. It felt useless. Shadows had always been there, even when you could not see them. How could you block something that was part of the air itself? Still, moving kept my mind from splintering. My hands shook as I stacked an old cardboard box on top of another, filling a space I thought looked too dark. The footsteps outside had grown more irregular. At first the figures had marched in perfect unison, circling the houses like soldiers on patrol. Now they scattered. Sometimes I heard 2 or 3 moving together, their shoes crunching on gravel, and sometimes it was a lone set of steps dragging slowly past the basement windows. Once in a while, one of them would stop directly above us. The floorboards groaned under their weight, and then the voice came, muffled but clear. "Police, open the door." Always the same words. Always that warped tone, too flat, too long. At 3:15 the phone buzzed again. I pulled it from under the mattress where I had hidden it earlier. The screen glowed weak red, the letters sharp against the black. Do not attempt communication. Do not attempt to confirm identities. They will use voices of the familiar. Survive until dawn. I read it silently, not daring to let my sister hear this time. She was already on the edge, her lips trembling as she mouthed words I could not understand. I slipped the phone back under the mattress and sat beside her. She leaned against me, her breath shallow, eyes wide. Minutes dragged like hours. The bulb flickered once, dimming just long enough to make my stomach lurch. My sister whimpered and pressed closer to me. I whispered that it was fine, that the light would hold. Even as I said it, I did not believe it. At 3:30 the knocks came again, not from the front door this time, but from the small basement window at ground level. 3 sharp taps against the glass. I froze. The window was so small that no person could fit through it, yet the sound was unmistakable. A second later the voice followed, louder now, clearer than before. Police, open the door. My sister screamed into her blanket, muffling the sound. I grabbed the flashlight from her lap and aimed it at the window. For a split second I thought I saw a face pressed against the glass, pale and smooth like wax, eyes too large and too still. Then the bulb overhead steadied again, and the window was empty. I staggered back, clutching the flashlight until my fingers hurt. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. They knew where we were. They had always known. The next knock came from the door itself, so hard the couch jolted forward an inch. Dust fell from the ceiling, peppering my hair and shoulders. The voice followed, distorted into something almost inhuman. Police, open the door. The words were dragged so slow they sounded like groans. I pushed the couch back with all my weight, grunting under my breath. My sister held the flashlight beam steady, her hands trembling but her aim true. The light caught the edges of the doorframe, and for a moment the knocking stopped. At 3:45, another sound cut through the silence. Not knocking this time, but whispering. Dozens of voices, layered and broken, seeping through the cracks in the door. Some of them sounded like neighbors, some like strangers, and one of them was Mom. Her voice was faint but clear, calling my name the way she used to when dinner was ready. I felt my body go rigid, every muscle straining toward the sound. My throat tightened, and I almost answered before my sister's hand clamped onto my arm. She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. I swallowed hard, pressing my lips shut until they hurt. The whispering continued for minutes, weaving in and out of one another, until it was impossible to separate words from noise. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence after was unbearable. My sister buried her face into my shoulder, her body trembling with each shaky breath. I stroked her hair with a shaking hand, whispering over and over that we just had to hold on until dawn, but doubt chewed at me. What if dawn never came? At 4 o'clock, the bulb above us sputtered and dimmed. The glow weakened to a sickly yellow, shadows stretching long across the floor. My chest seized. I scrambled to the shelf in the corner, grabbing a box of old camping supplies. I ripped it open, tossing aside tangled ropes and empty cans until I found 2 lanterns. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped them. I flicked one on, relief flooding me when its beam cut strong through the room. My sister grabbed the second, setting it beside her blanket like a shield. The bulb flickered again and went out completely, plunging us into the glow of the lanterns. The shadows pressed immediately against the edges of the light, writhing and trembling as if alive. Faces flickered in them, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. I held my breath, clutching the tire iron in one hand and the flashlight in the other. The knocks grew faster, angrier. The door rattled, hinges squealing under the strain. My sister whimpered, but kept her lantern steady, her small body glowing in the halo of its light. I pressed harder against the couch, whispering through clenched teeth that it would hold, that the dawn was close. At 4:15, another alert buzzed from my phone. The red glow lit the basement in an eerie pulse. I picked it up with shaking hands and read the words, "They have replaced those taken. If your loved one answers, it is not them." My stomach dropped. I looked at my sister, her face pale, eyes wide. I thought of Mom's voice whispering through the door, the perfect imitation. I thought of Mr. Phi. Carlson opening his door and never returning. My chest ached with the weight of it. These things were not just taking people, they were becoming them. I shoved the phone away, unable to look at her for a moment, terrified of what I might see in her eyes. She leaned against me, whispering that she was scared. Her voice cracked in a way that felt too human, too raw to be anything else. I held her tight, clinging to that small piece of hope. The knocking slowed again, 3 measured raps, then silence. I leaned back against the couch, my arms shaking with exhaustion. My throat was raw from whispering, my body sore from holding the barricade. The lanterns hummed softly, their beams steady but not eternal. The shadows trembled at the edges of their glow, patient, endless. I realized then that surviving until dawn might not be enough. If dawn never came, if the sun did not rise, we could only last as long as the batteries, as long as the light. And when the light died, so would we. By 4:30, the basement smelled of sweat and candle wax and dust, the air thick enough that every breath scraped my throat. The lanterns hummed faintly, casting their circles of light against the concrete walls, but the shadows pressed harder than before. They pulsed against the edges, shapes swelling and retreating like waves against a shore. Each time the glow trembled, the faces appeared, white eyes, open mouths, frozen in silent screams. My sister clutched her blanket and the smaller lantern, her lips moving silently. I did not know if she was praying or repeating the words of the alert, but I knew better than to interrupt. The knocking had grown less frequent. Instead, the voices filled the gaps, sliding through the walls in tones that bent and broke like warped recordings. Sometimes they called my name. Sometimes they said hers. Sometimes they spoke in voices we knew. Mom, Dad, neighbors. Even my own voice twisted back at me, begging me to open the door. Each time I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. It was the only thing that kept me from answering. At 4:45, the couch against the door shifted forward an inch. The lantern light quivered, shadows spilling across the edges. My sister screamed, clapping her hands over her mouth too late, and the knocking returned instantly. 3 sharp raps that shook the frame. The voice followed, deeper and slower than ever, each word dragging into the next. Police, open the door. I slammed my back against the couch. The tire iron gripped tight in my sweaty hands. My breath came in ragged bursts, heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo through the walls. The door rattled again, harder this time, but the hinges held. The lantern light glowed steady, cutting across the trembling wood. I whispered to myself over and over, survive until dawn, survive until dawn. The words felt more like a plea than a plan. The next alert came at 4:50. My phone buzzed against the concrete floor, screen lighting the room with its sickly red glow. I picked it up with shaking fingers. The words filled the screen in stark letters. Dawn confirmed. Hold light until sunrise. Do not open doors. Do not respond. Survive. I read it twice, the words settling into me like a weight I had been carrying too long finally set down. Dawn was coming. The night would end. My chest tightened with something close to hope, though it was fragile, a thread that could snap with the next knock. I showed the screen to my sister, and for the first time all night her eyes lit with something other than fear. She clutched my arm, whispering, "It's almost over." The shadows did not retreat. If anything, they pressed closer, as though they knew time was running out. The faces blurred together, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, their eyes white, their mouths stretching wider than before. They stared at us through the black, unblinking, waiting for the lanterns to fail. I shifted closer to my sister, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, and whispered that we would see the sun soon. At 5 o'clock, the first pale light slipped across the edges of the basement window. My chest seized with relief so sudden I nearly sobbed. I scrambled to my feet and moved to the glass, brushing dust away with trembling hands. The sky outside was not bright, not yet, but it was changing, softening from black to gray. My throat tightened, and I whispered, "It's real." The shadows hissed. I swear I heard it. A sound like steam escaping a pipe, low and angry. They recoiled slightly from the window, their edges shivering. The faces blurred and melted back into the dark. My sister let out a sob that sounded half like laughter, clutching her lantern tighter. We watched together as the gray brightened, shifting slowly to the first faint streaks of orange. The knocking stopped. The voices fell silent. For the first time in hours, the house was still. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, the tears coming hot and fast, and whispered thank you to no one in particular. By 5:30, the sunlight cut clear across the floor of the basement. The shadows retreated in long, jerking motions, folding into themselves as though dragged away by invisible hands. One by one, they slipped back through the cracks, seeping out of the windows, out of the corners, until only the glow of the lanterns and the warmth of the sun remained. The air grew lighter, easier to breathe, the weight pressing on my chest lifting at last. When the light filled the room fully, I dared to move the couch from the door. My sister clung to me, whispering not to, but I had to know. The wood was cold under my hands, but still intact, the hinges unbroken. I pulled the door open slowly. Nothing waited on the other side. The house above was quiet, sunlight cutting across the floors and walls. No cruisers lined the street. No figures stood on the porch. The neighborhood looked still and empty, as though the night had never happened. Mr. Carlson's door across the street still hung open. His porch light burned faint against the dawn. No movement came from inside. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to look away. There would be time for grief later. For now, survival was enough. I led my sister upstairs, each step lighter than the last, the warmth of the rising sun spilling across us. She clutched my arm, her blanket dragging behind her, her face streaked with tears but calmer than it had been all night. We stood together in the kitchen, watching the light grow brighter through the windows. The house hummed with silence, ordinary silence, the kind that had once seemed empty but now felt like salvation. I picked up the phone from the counter. No new alerts had come. The last words remained burned into the screen, faint against the fading red. Dawn confirmed. Survive. I turned it off and set it face down, not wanting to see it again. By 6 o'clock, the sun stood fully above the horizon, washing the houses in gold. My sister leaned against me, eyes closed, breathing steady for the first time. I wrapped an arm around her and stared at the street, the memory of the night still raw, but dulled by the light. The cruisers were gone, the figures were gone. Only the sunlight remained, bright and unrelenting, filling every shadow until there was no space left for them to hide. We had survived. That was all that mattered. And as long as the sun kept rising, as long as the light held, I knew we would never open the door to knocking in the dark again. I know how this sounds, and honestly, I almost didn't post this, but I guess sometimes you just need to get it out there, even if it sounds crazy. It started when I was 9 years old, waiting for the school bus every morning in my neighborhood in Salt Lake City. There was this man. He always wore the same blue coat, and no matter where I looked, he was there. Just standing, watching, but never close enough to scare me outright. More like a shadow on the edge of my vision. I told myself it was nothing at first, just some random guy, but the feeling never went away. The odd thing was, he never did anything. No words, no gestures, no attempts to approach me or anyone else. Just that same coat, the same tall frame, and those eyes, hard to describe, but I remember feeling like they could see right through me. I told my parents once, and they told me to stop imagining things. At school, teachers shrugged it off too, and other kids didn't see him, or maybe they just didn't care. But I did. Every morning, that man was there. When my family moved when I was 12, I thought maybe I could leave him behind, that maybe changing neighborhoods would make him disappear. But he didn't. Not long after we settled into our new house, I saw him again, standing across the street, looking right at our front door. I blinked, and he was gone. I ran inside, heart racing, trying to convince myself I was just tired or stressed. But deep down, I knew. High school brought its own distractions, but the man in the blue coat kept showing up. At 16, I worked at a small coffee shop after school. One evening, locking up alone, I looked out the window and there he was, standing in the shadow of a streetlight across the road. I thought about calling the police but wasn't sure what I'd say. That's when I realized the loneliness of my situation, the fear I carried but couldn't share without sounding insane. College took me far away, miles from Salt Lake City. For a while, I thought maybe distance would help. I lived in a city I barely knew, made new friends, tried to forget the past. But then one night, scrolling through photos from a weekend trip, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There he was, in the background of a group picture, standing still on a street corner. Blue coat, unmistakable. My friends thought it was a coincidence, a passerby caught in the frame. But I couldn't shake it. That photo was proof, and suddenly the years of denial and fear came crashing back. I started keeping a journal, writing down every sighting, every feeling of being watched. The nights were the worst. I'd wake up, certain something was outside my window, breathing in the dark. I felt exhausted, trapped in a nightmare that never ended. When I met my husband, I hoped the fear would fade. Having someone who loved me should have been enough to feel safe. But even then, sometimes in the quiet moments, I'd catch myself scanning the shadows, wondering if the blue coat was out there somewhere. It was like a ghost I couldn't outrun. Now I'm 33, married, with a 5-year-old daughter who means everything to me. This morning, she came into the kitchen, her small face serious and scared. "Mom, there's a man in a blue coat standing across the street," she said. My heart stopped. I looked out the window, but no one was there. I wanted to tell her it was just her imagination, but the fear I've carried for years told me otherwise. The way she described him, silent, watching, never moving it, was exactly what I'd seen since I was a kid. I'm terrified, honestly, not just for me anymore, but for her. What kind of life is this when you feel watched by something that has followed you across cities, years, and time? Sometimes I wonder if it's a real person obsessed with me, a stalker so patient and careful he stayed hidden all these years. Or maybe it's a curse, something passed down through my family, a shadow repeating itself in my life and now my daughter's. Or maybe my mind has twisted memories and fears into something darker than reality. I don't know the answer. I only know I can't ignore it anymore. For the past 24 years, this blue coat has been a silent presence, always just out of reach, but impossible to forget. And now it's part of my daughter's world, too. I'm sharing this because I'm scared, but also because maybe someone else out there knows this feeling. Maybe someone else has felt watched or followed by something that won't let go. I don't have answers yet. I just want to be heard. After my daughter told me about the man in the blue coat standing across the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just something from my past. It had crossed over into my present, into my family's life. For years, I'd tried to ignore it or explain it away as paranoia or imagination, but hearing it come from her scared me in a way nothing else had. It was like a slow, creeping cold that settled deep in my chest. That day, I kept looking out the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of him, but the street was empty. Just normal sounds of neighbors, cars passing, and birds chirping. Still, I couldn't convince myself the blue coat was gone. The silence felt unnatural, as if it were holding its breath. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, just some guy in a blue jacket who happened to be outside, but I knew better. That coat was a symbol of fear, a constant reminder of something I had tried to bury for years. I wanted to talk to my husband about it, to make him understand the weight I was carrying. When I finally did, his reaction was quiet. He didn't dismiss me, which I appreciated, but he didn't have answers either. He said maybe it was a coincidence, someone wearing a blue coat in our neighborhood. That maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed. Part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that maybe I was just tired or stressed from work and parenting. But then I remembered all the times I'd seen that same coat, in different cities and years apart. How it followed me quietly, never threatening but always there. It felt impossible to ignore. That night, lying awake in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about how long this had been going on. Years of fear, worry, and watching over my shoulder. I felt tired, worn down by the constant vigilance. The darkness in the room pressed in around me as memories flashed through my mind, seeing that tall figure in the distance, feeling his gaze like a weight on my back. I started keeping a small notebook by my bed, jotting down every sighting, every feeling. Sometimes I caught glimpses of something blue out of the corner of my eye when I was walking home. Other times I heard the soft shuffle of footsteps that stopped when I turned around. It was like a ghost that refused to rest. The next day, I showed my husband the photos I had taken. Over the years, the blurry shadows in the background, the faint shape in the corner, wearing that unmistakable blue coat. He looked at them with a mix of concern and skepticism. It was hard to explain years of fear through blurry images, but they were all I had. I reached out to a private investigator, someone who specialized in missing persons and odd cases. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I hoped he could help me find some answers. The idea of someone watching me for decades was terrifying, and I needed help. The investigator was patient and listened without judgment. He asked detailed questions about every sighting, every feeling. We went through my notebook and photos together. He told me that cases like mine were rare but not unheard of. Some people were stalked for years by strangers who never made contact, and others were haunted by shadows from their pasts that defied explanation. He promised to look into it and see if there were any reports of a man in a blue coat following or watching people in the cities I had lived in. He warned me it might be a long and frustrating process, but said he would do his best. While waiting for updates, I tried to focus on my family, but my daughter's words and the memories of the blue coat kept pulling me back. She was so young, and I hated that she was scared. One evening, she asked me if the man in the blue coat was a ghost. I didn't have an answer. I told her I would protect her, and that no one would hurt her. The fear was no longer just mine, it was ours. One night, I left the cameras on around the house, hoping to catch something. The footage was mostly normal trees swaying in the wind, cars passing by. Then, around midnight, a figure appeared near the edge of the yard. It was tall, still, and unmistakably wearing a blue coat. The image was grainy, but it was enough to confirm what I already feared. Watching the footage made my stomach turn. I had proof, but what good was proof if no one would believe me? I debated calling the police, but worried about being dismissed or worse, laughed at. The investigator suggested contacting local authorities with the footage, but he also warned me that without more evidence or a direct threat, they might not act. The system wasn't always designed to handle something like this, a silent watcher who didn't speak, didn't follow directly, but never left. I started taking self-defense classes, not because I expected to face the man, but because I wanted to feel stronger. It helped to have something to control, something tangible I could do to protect myself and my daughter. Days turned into weeks, and the investigator found some leads. Reports from different states mentioned sightings of a man in a blue coat near schools, workplaces, and residential areas. The descriptions matched mine, and in some cases, the man seemed to be watching families like mine. Some of the people who reported him tried to confront him or move away, but the sightings continued. It was like he was a ghost, a shadow bound to follow certain people, or maybe even certain bloodlines. I thought about my own family history and asked my parents if anyone in our family had ever felt watched or had strange experiences. They hesitated, then shared vague stories of unexplained fears and events no one talked about. My grandmother told me about a figure she sometimes saw near their old home, someone who never spoke, but always seemed to be watching. It made me wonder if this blue coat was tied to something deeper, something passed down through generations like a curse or a legacy. All this was overwhelming, but I refused to let it control me. I kept talking openly with my husband and close friends, sharing my fears and the history I was uncovering. Not everyone understood, but it helped me feel less alone. My daughter's drawings of the man in the blue coat started to change. Sometimes he looked sad or lonely, not just frightening. She said he was waiting for something but didn't know how to ask. Her words gave me pause. Maybe this wasn't just a stalker or a threat. Maybe there was something more, a story that needed to be told or a pain that needed to be healed. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I had to keep going. For her, for myself, and for anyone else who ever felt like they were being watched without reason. Because sometimes the hardest thing is not the fear itself, but finding the courage to face it head on. The private investigator called me one afternoon with news I hadn't quite expected. He said he had located a man who might have some answers. The man lived in a small town not too far from where I grew up, and apparently he had been connected to multiple sightings of the figure in the blue coat. The investigator warned me that this man was reclusive and difficult to approach, but agreed to set up a meeting for us. Part of me was terrified, and part of me felt desperate for any clue that might explain the nightmare that had been my life. When the day came, I drove out to the man's house with a mix of anxiety and determination. The place was isolated, tucked behind towering pines, the kind of spot that looked forgotten by time. The man was sitting on his porch, rocking slowly in an old wooden chair, wearing a worn jacket that wasn't blue, but carried a certain faded weight. His face was lined, eyes sharp but tired, as if he carried decades of stories no one wanted to hear. He didn't greet me with warmth. Instead, he simply nodded and said, "You're the one who's been followed." I nodded back, words caught in my throat. "Yes, for as long as I can remember, and now my daughter sees him too." He studied me for a long moment before motioning for me to sit on a bench nearby. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with unspoken things. Finally, he began to speak, his voice low and deliberate. "This figure," he said, "has been appearing for generations. Not just you or your daughter, but many before you. It is neither fully alive nor dead. It is a watcher, bound to the bloodline of those who carry an old debt." I felt a chill settle over me, the kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather. "A debt?" I asked, barely daring to breathe. He nodded. "A wrong committed long ago, something left undone. This watcher follows, not to harm, but to remind. Some see it as a curse, others a warning." I tried to process the idea. Could this blue coat really be tied to something my family had done generations ago? The thought was overwhelming, but it made a strange kind of sense. It explained why the figure had appeared everywhere I had lived, why it watched but never spoke. The man on the porch went on to explain that the watcher did not communicate in words, but in presence. It was an echo of history, a living reminder that some things cannot be forgotten. He shared stories of others who had seen the coat people who lived scattered across the country, each carrying their own burden. I asked if there was a way to end it, to break the cycle. His answer was vague. "It requires facing the past," he said, "acknowledging the debt, seeking forgiveness, and sometimes sacrifice." That sounded impossible, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. After I left, I carried the weight of the conversation with me like a stone in my chest. I thought about the generations before me, the secrets they might have kept, the wrongs they might have committed. Was this why I had been followed? Was this why my daughter was seeing the same figure? Back home, I spent hours digging into my family history. I talked to my parents and grandparents, searching for stories that might explain the watcher's presence. Their memories were patchy, filled with gaps and shadows, but I found hints of an old scandal involving my great-grandfather, a man who had been involved in a betrayal that had torn a community apart. I read letters and old documents, piecing together a story of broken trust and unresolved pain. It seemed like a wound left open, something that might have echoed through the years to reach me. All the while, my daughter's drawings became more detailed. She added faces to the blue coat, sometimes sad, sometimes kind. She said the man was watching over us, waiting for the right moment to rest. Her words were both comforting and heartbreaking. The private investigator continued his work, following leads, checking archives, and talking to people who had reported sightings. He found patterns that suggested the blue coat was not just tied to one family, but to a series of families connected by this old debt. One evening, while reviewing photos from the past, I noticed something strange. In an old family picture from when I was a toddler, I could faintly make out a figure in the background wearing something that looked like a blue coat. My heart raced as I realized the watcher had been near me long before I had any memory. It was overwhelming, the idea that this presence had been part of my life since the beginning, silently observing, waiting. At night, I started having dreams about the watcher. In them, the blue coat was less threatening, more like a guardian lost in time. It showed me flashes of the past people, places, moments tied to the family debt. The dreams were vivid and unsettling, leaving me feeling both afraid and curious. I shared the dreams with my daughter, who said she had them too. We talked about the watcher as if it were a real part of our lives, something we had to understand rather than fear. I also sought help from a therapist, who specialized in trauma and anxiety. Talking about the fear, the stalking, and the family history helped me manage the weight of it. The therapist encouraged me to focus on grounding myself in the present and protecting my family from being consumed by fear. Despite all this, there were moments when the watcher felt very close. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of blue out of the corner of my eye or feel a chill in a warm room. It was like a presence that never quite left. But I also felt stronger, more determined to face this shadow. I began creating rituals with my daughter, lighting candles, telling stories, and drawing pictures. It helped us take some control, turning fear into something we could confront together. The private investigator called one day with news of a woman who might hold answers. She had grown up in one of the towns where the watcher was seen frequently and claimed to have knowledge of the old debt. I agreed to meet her, hoping she could shed light on the history I was uncovering. Each step I took toward understanding brought a mix of relief and dread. I was no longer alone in this, but the story was far from simple. The watcher, the debt, the family secrets, they were all tangled together in a way that would take time to unravel. For now, I held on to hope. Hope that by facing the past we could find peace. Hope that the watcher might one day rest. And hope that my daughter and I could live without fear shadowing every moment. Meeting the woman who claimed to know more about the watcher felt like stepping deeper into a shadow I had been trying to avoid my entire life. She was older, maybe in her late 60s, with sharp eyes that seemed to look right through me. We met at a quiet cafe in a small town not far from where she grew up. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, but her voice was steady. She told me stories passed down through her family whispers of a blue coat that followed certain families, a presence tied to a wrong committed long ago. The details were murky, like fragments of a broken mirror, but the core was clear. This watcher was bound to a debt unpaid, appearing to remind those connected to it that the past was not done with them. She mentioned a curse, but not in the way I imagined. It was less about punishment and more about unfinished business. She said that the watcher was a kind of guardian, forced to roam until the debt was acknowledged and balanced. The blue coat was a symbol of sorrow and regret, not malice. Listening to her made me realize how much I had been alone in carrying this burden. This wasn't just my story. It was something shared by others across generations and places. The idea was comforting in a strange way, like I was part of a long thread connecting past and present. She gave me an old journal, worn and fragile, filled with notes and letters from her ancestors. The writing spoke of promises broken, secrets kept, and a hope that someday the debt would be settled. It felt like a map, a guide through a maze of pain and memory. Back at home, I spent hours reading the journal. Each page revealed new pieces of a puzzle I had only glimpsed before. The debt was tied to betrayal within families, acts of selfishness that had ripple effects far beyond their time. It was a story of people caught in cycles of hurt and regret, with the watcher serving as a reminder that some things could not be forgotten. My daughter listened to parts of the story with wide eyes. She still saw the blue coat sometimes, but now she spoke of him with less fear and more curiosity. She asked questions I didn't always have answers for, but I told her I was learning too. The private investigator brought more news. He had uncovered a record of a man in a blue coat who had lived decades ago, a figure tied to the original wrong that started the debt. The man's life was marked by tragedy and loss, and after his death, the blue coat began to appear to those connected to the families involved. It felt like everything was coming full circle. The Watcher was not just a shadow, but a story carried through time, a presence born of pain and unfinished promises. At night, the dreams returned. The Watcher appeared, no longer just a distant figure, but someone I could almost reach. In the dreams, he showed me flashes of the past moments of heartbreak, fear, and choices made long ago. They were painful to witness, but necessary, like peeling back layers of old wounds. I started sharing the story with close friends and family. It was hard to talk about something so strange and personal, but I needed support. Some listened with sympathy, others with disbelief, but I no longer felt the need to hide it. One night, my daughter and I lit candles and told stories of the blue coat. We spoke of hope and forgiveness, of breaking cycles and healing wounds. It was a small ritual, but it gave us both comfort. The Watcher's presence remained, but it felt less threatening, more like a part of our lives that needed acknowledgement rather than fear. I began to see changes in myself too. The constant anxiety softened, replaced by a cautious peace. I was learning to live with the Watcher, not just run from it. The woman's journal and the investigator's findings gave me a path forward. It would not be easy. Facing the past meant confronting family secrets, long-held pain, and fears I had buried deep. But it was necessary if I wanted to protect my daughter and find freedom. I started reaching out to relatives, asking questions about our family history. Some were reluctant to talk, others were curious, and shared stories I had never heard. It was like opening a door to a room I had been afraid to enter. Through these conversations, I discovered moments of kindness and courage that balanced the darker parts of our history. It gave me hope that the debt could be repaid, that the Watcher could finally rest. Despite this progress, there were still moments of fear. Sometimes when I was alone, I felt the weight of those watching eyes. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, and the chill of the blue coat lingered in the air. I knew the Watcher was patient. It could wait for as long as it needed, and so could I. I promised myself I would keep moving forward, no matter how hard it got, for my daughter, for my family, and for the hope of breaking free. One evening, as we sat together after telling stories, my daughter looked up at me with a small smile and said, "Maybe he just wants to be friends." Her innocence was a reminder that fear could be transformed into understanding. The Watcher was still here, but maybe, just maybe, so was the chance for peace. After our talks and the rituals, I thought maybe things would calm down. Maybe the Watcher would ease off, or at least fade into the background. But life has a way of reminding you that some things aren't so easily escaped. One late afternoon, while I was picking my daughter up from school, I noticed him again, the man in the blue coat, standing at the edge of the playground, just watching, not moving, not approaching, just observing like he always had. My stomach twisted into knots. I wanted to pull my daughter close, to tell her not to look, but she was calm, almost curious. I felt a strange mix of protectiveness and resignation. This figure had been part of our lives for so long, part menace, part mystery, that I wasn't sure how to face it anymore. That night, I told my husband about the sighting. We talked long into the early morning, trying to piece together what this presence meant and what we could do. He reminded me that while fear is powerful, knowledge and action are stronger. We agreed that ignoring it wasn't an option anymore. The next day, I called the private investigator. I needed answers, or at least guidance. The investigator suggested looking into the original source of the debt more deeply. He recommended a historian who specialized in local family histories and curses, someone who might understand the nuances of these old stories. We scheduled a meeting with the historian, a woman with a quiet presence and deep knowledge of the area's past. She explained how old debts and promises could manifest in stories, rituals, and even in people's lives. She talked about the idea of ancestral memory, how the past lingers in families, shaping their present. She didn't dismiss the watcher as just superstition. Instead, she treated it as a symbol, a real force shaped by history and emotion. She suggested that acknowledging and honoring the past might be the key to ending the watcher's hold. I left that meeting feeling both hopeful and overwhelmed. The path ahead was unclear, but it was real, and it was mine to walk. Back home, I focused on my daughter's well-being. She was adjusting to school and friends, and I wanted her to have a childhood free from shadows. But the blue coat still appeared, sometimes in her drawings, sometimes in her stories. She described him as waiting for something, and I wondered if she sensed more than I did. I started keeping a journal again, this time writing with purpose. I recorded our experiences, the stories we heard, and the emotions we felt. It became a way to take control, to document what was happening in case we needed to understand it later. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom window. My heart raced as I looked through the curtains, but saw nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of blue, a flicker of the coat disappearing behind a tree. I realized that no matter how much I learned, the watcher was patient. It waited, it observed, and it did not leave easily. The following weeks were a mix of normal family life and moments of unease. I balanced making breakfast, helping with homework, and working, all while feeling the weight of unseen eyes. It was exhausting but also grounding. I refused to let fear control me. One afternoon, while organizing old family photos, I found a picture I had never seen before. It was a group shot from decades ago, with my great-grandfather at the center. Behind him, faint but unmistakable, was the figure in the blue coat, the same tall, silent watcher who had haunted my life. It was proof that this presence had been intertwined with my family long before I was born. That realization was both terrifying and oddly comforting. It connected me to a story much larger than myself. I showed the photo to my daughter, and she smiled softly. "He's always been part of us," she said. Her words reminded me that sometimes accepting something is the first step to changing it. With renewed determination, I reached out to more family members, hoping to uncover forgotten stories or clues that might help. Some were hesitant, wary of stirring up old ghosts. Others shared memories of strange feelings or sightings they had never spoken about. Piece by piece, a picture emerged of a family haunted by past mistakes and the burden of secrets. It was painful but necessary to face. One evening, the watcher appeared again, but this time my daughter saw him too. She held my hand tightly and said, "Mom, I think he's tired." Her innocence and empathy were a balm to my fear. Maybe the Watcher wasn't just a threat, but a lost soul caught in time, waiting for peace. We started a new ritual. Every night we lit a candle and spoke to the Watcher, acknowledging his pain and asking him to rest. It was strange and a little scary, but it brought a sense of connection rather than fear. The private investigator found more reports linking the Blue Coat to unresolved tragedies in other families. It seemed the Watcher moved between families burdened by old debts, a spectral reminder that the past lingers until confronted. Through therapy, research, and support from loved ones, I learned to live with the Watcher not as a prisoner of fear, but as someone carrying a story that needed telling. Some days were harder than others. Sometimes the shadows felt thick and the presence heavy, but in those moments, I reminded myself of the hope I held for my daughter, a future where she could grow without fear. I realized that the Watcher's hold wasn't just about me or my family. It was about breaking cycles, healing wounds, and finding light in the darkness. As the days passed, the Blue Coat's appearances became less frequent, less urgent. The weight on my chest lightened. It felt like we were moving towards something, maybe not an end, but a new beginning. One night, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she whispered, "I think he's saying goodbye." Her words filled me with a bittersweet hope. Maybe after all these years, the Watcher was finally ready to rest. The weeks after my daughter's words felt different. It was like a slow, subtle shift in the air, a quiet easing of the tension that had clung to us for so long. I kept seeing glimpses of the Blue Coat less often, and the heaviness in my chest started to lift. But I also knew that this wasn't just about a figure in a coat disappearing overnight. It was about healing something old and deep, something that had tied itself to my family for generations. One afternoon I sat down with my daughter in the backyard, the sun warm on our faces. We talked about the Watcher, about the stories we had gathered, and about the rituals we had started. She asked questions with the curiosity only a child can have. "Do you think he's finally happy?" she said, twisting a blade of grass between her fingers. I smiled softly and said, "Maybe he is. Or maybe he's just ready to rest now." That night, I lit the candles we always kept by the window. My daughter held my hand as we spoke quietly, asking for peace, for forgiveness, for the chance to move forward. It was a simple act, but it felt powerful, a way to close the chapter on years of fear and uncertainty. The next morning, I woke to an unusual quiet. The usual sounds of the neighborhood were there, but something felt lighter. I looked out the window and didn't see the familiar silhouette of the Blue Coat waiting across the street. For the first time in decades, it was gone. I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The Watcher had been a constant, a shadow tied to the past, but it was also a reminder that the past never really leaves us until we face it. Over the following months, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The nights were quieter, my daughter laughed more freely, and I could finally breathe without that weight pressing down. The Blue Coat was no longer part of our daily lives. I continued to explore my family's history, piecing together the stories that had once been hidden. I reached out to relatives, wrote down what I learned, and shared the lessons we had all carried for too long. It was a way to honor the past and make sure it did not control the future. The private investigator remained in touch, telling me about other families with similar stories, other Watchers tied to debts and memories. It was comforting to know we were not alone, that healing was possible even when the past seemed too dark to face. One day, while walking with my daughter through a nearby park, she stopped and pointed to a figure in the distance. It was a man in a blue jacket, but this time there was no fear in her eyes. Instead, she smiled and waved. I followed her gaze and realized that the man was simply another person enjoying the afternoon, unaware of the story his coat might carry. I squeezed my daughter's hand and felt a surge of gratitude. We had moved beyond the shadow, beyond the watcher, into something new. I think the most important thing I learned through all this was about the power of facing fear together. My daughter and I had shared something that could have broken us, but instead, it brought us closer. We learned that some things from the past will follow us, but they do not have to define us. When I look back now, I realize how much strength it took to live with this presence, to seek answers, and to hold on to hope. It wasn't about defeating a ghost or running away. It was about understanding, acceptance, and love. I no longer see the watcher as something to fear. I see it as a symbol of the ties that bind us, the stories that shape us, and the healing we are all capable of. My daughter still draws pictures of the man in the blue coat from time to time, but they are no longer frightening. Sometimes he is smiling, sometimes he is just standing quietly, watching over us from a distance. And maybe that is how it is meant to be. Life is a mix of light and shadow, of joy and pain. We carry our histories with us, but we also carry the power to change the story. So now, when I see a figure in a blue coat from across the street, or in the background of a photo, I do not freeze or panic. I remember what we have learned. I breathe deeply and remind myself that fear is only part of the picture. Because in the end, we are more than our fears. We are more than the watchers in the shadows. We are the ones who choose to keep moving forward. And that is the real story. I was halfway through folding laundry on my bed when the emergency alert tone clawed out of my phone. The screen lit my face and my arms went cold before I even read it. Keep all lights on, the dark has spread. Do not enter unlit areas. I read it twice because the words did not make sense together. Weather advisories talk about wind or ice. They do not give orders that feel like something is already in the room with you. I thought it was a mistake until I looked at the corner of my room. The lamp on my desk threw a warm puddle of light across the carpet, and beyond that, the shadows pooled like water. Too deep, too heavy, like someone had poured ink into a square of air. The longer I stared, the more I was sure it was moving, slow as breath, slipping along the baseboard like a tide. I blinked until my lashes hurt. The dark thickened anyway. I set the shirt down and grabbed the lamp with both hands as if more light would act like a wall. The bulb hummed the way it does when it has been on too long. Light flooded the corner, but the thickness did not melt. It clung like wet fog that refused to lift. Another buzz made me jump. Same alert, same words. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back with 2 fingers. The sky was clear. No storm, stars sharp and small. The neighborhood looked normal until I noticed the street lamps. They were not steady. They shivered. Each one flickered at odd times like they were breathing out of rhythm. A porch light across the street winked out and came back weak, like it had been held underwater. A man from the house opposite mine came outside in a robe with his phone in his hand. He had that annoyed look people get when the power goes weird. He opened the breaker box and peered in as if staring would fix anything. His light clicked off while he stood there. The darkness rolled across him like a sheet pulled over a body. He did not make a sound. 1 second he was there, and the next there was only an empty square of black that did not look like night at all. I closed the curtain and pressed my back to the wall. The desk lamp made a soft circle, and my own shadow stood inside it like a cutout. I turned on the ceiling light and the nightstand lamp and the little string lights I never use. The bulbs stung my eyes, but I kept them on. I carried the desk lamp to the hallway so it spilled light toward the bathroom and flipped more switches, kitchen and living room, even the tiny bulb inside the oven. The house hummed with electricity. It felt alive, and I whispered a thanks to it without thinking. My phone kept buzzing, so I brought it with me. The message never changed. Keep all lights on. Do not enter unlit areas. I texted my sister 2 rooms over. Are you awake? Turn on everything. She answered yes, then opened her door. Her face looked washed out. She stared at the hallway floor and asked why the dark looked thicker near the baseboard. We walked room to room, switching on lamps I never liked. The orange shaded one in the corner, the brass one by the bookshelf. The apartment turned into a chain of islands, bright and almost too warm, and between them the shadows tried to pool in the seams like water hunting a low spot. In the kitchen I lit the under-cabinet lights. The air took on a metal taste like old wires. My sister stood very still and said, "Listen." We listened. The refrigerator hum sounded too loud, like it was bracing itself. I kept thinking about the man across the street, and the way the dark pulled him in without a sound. Real fear arrives with nothing at all. I told my sister to sit at the table with her flashlight and keep it pointed at the floor where the ceiling light did not reach. She argued out of habit, and then she saw the corner by the pantry where the tile looked too black, and she sat without another word. I tried the living room lamp by the window again because it had flickered, and when I tapped the base, the shade steadied. I lifted the curtain an inch and looked along the glass. The street looked like a photograph that had been soaked too long. Edges soft, shapes blurred. The street lamps pulsed. I thought I saw a dark wave roll along a wall inside a neighbor window, and then the room went black like someone put a lid on it. Back in my room, the corner had not crept farther, but it had not retreated either. It looked patient. I stacked books between the lamp and that square of thick air-like paper could be a wall. I took batteries from the remotes and loaded every flashlight we owned and set them in a row on the counter, like silverware for a meal no one wanted to eat. I kept waiting for the alert to say more, to offer instructions that sounded like people in a bright room had argued and chosen the best ones. The screen stayed the same. My sister asked what if the power goes, and I said we will deal with that if it happens. The lights hummed. The dark at the edges of the room breathed very softly. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and listened to my sister say nothing. Do not say the scary thing out loud because then it becomes the only thing in the room. I told her we would keep moving, keep the lights hot, keep the shadows thin. I said it calmly. She nodded without looking at me. Somewhere outside a transformer popped, distant and hollow, and the sound ran along the wires like a shiver. I tried to believe the light was enough, that a bright room could keep the night from learning our names tonight. The apartment glowed like a lighthouse, and outside the glass the night leaned in closer, learning the shape of us by the edges of our light. The second alert came at 11 exactly, the same noise, that awful siren that makes your bones tighten, and the same red screen that washed my hands in color. Keep all lights on. Do not enter unlit areas. But this time the message had an extra line. Power interruptions expected. Prepare backup sources. My stomach dropped as soon as I read it. If they were already warning us about outages, that meant whatever was happening was bigger than one neighborhood. My sister sat at the kitchen table with her knees tucked under her chin, her flashlight pointed at the corner where the ceiling bulb did not reach. She asked me what it meant, her voice flat, too calm, the way you sound when your body knows panic will make things worse. I told her it was probably rolling blackouts, and the system was overreacting. I did not believe myself, but I needed her too. She nodded once, and then stared at the floor tiles. The lights in the living room flickered, then steadied. We both froze, staring at the bulbs like they were living things struggling to breathe. The shadows pressed against the window panes, darker than night, black like tar. I grabbed every candle we had and spread them across the counters, the coffee table, the shelves. My sister lit them with shaking hands. The flames wavered, even without a draft. bending as though something was leaning close to blow them out. I peeked through the blinds again, just for a second. The street was worse than before. The man who had vanished earlier was not the only one gone now. Porch lights blinked off one by one, and when they did, the houses seemed to sag into the black. One in particular made me shiver. Mrs. Langley's, the widow next door. Her lights went out all at once, and a few seconds later, glass shattered. I flinched, my whole body stiff, and then I saw her in the window. Candlelight lit her face. Her eyes were wide, her hands pressed flat against the glass. Behind her, shadows curled upward like waves. They rose taller than her, bent around her shoulders like they were folding her into themselves. She tried to scream. I could see her mouth open wide, but no sound came through. Then the candle flickered once and went out. The window turned black. Her house never lit up again. I stumbled back from the blinds, breathing too hard, trying not to scream. My sister asked what I saw, and I told her to stay away from the windows. She asked again, sharper this time, and I just shook my head. I could not put it into words without making it real. At 11:15, the street lamps went out completely. Every single one. The hum of their electricity vanished, and the road disappeared, as though it had never been there. Our house and a few others still glowed, little islands against the flood, but the dark pushed closer the way water presses against glass. You could feel it, heavy, waiting for a crack. The air inside changed. It smelled faintly of ozone, like the air after lightning, and something else I could not place. Damp stone, maybe, or soil that had never seen the sun. My sister whispered that she could hear something, and when I asked what, she said it sounded like whispering. I held my breath and listened. At first, I thought she was wrong. The hum of the fridge and the buzz of the bulbs filled the air. Then I realized the sound threaded beneath all of that, low and steady, like dozens of mouths pressed to the glass, murmuring. The voices were not words I could understand. They slithered across syllables I had never heard before, but every so often one bent itself into my name. I dropped the blinds and pulled her flashlight beam toward the wall. The shadows stretched long and slow across the baseboard, reaching like fingers. The candle flames guttered in unison. I ran to the stove and turned on every burner, the blue flames leaping high, hissing like snakes. The shadows recoiled for a second, shrinking back, but they did not leave. They waited at the edges, restless. At 11:30, the television flickered on by itself. Static filled the screen, white and gray noise buzzing loud. My sister screamed, and I pulled the plug from the wall, but the screen stayed lit, the glow casting moving shapes across the carpet, faces pressed against the static, mouths wide, eyes hollow. They screamed silently. The volume roared even though the speakers were gone. I threw a blanket over it and shoved it face down on the floor. The glow dimmed, but did not vanish. I left it like that, my chest tight, my hands shaking too badly to try again. The phone buzzed once more with another alert. Power systems failing. Stay inside illuminated areas. Do not allow shadows to touch you. The words blurred as I read them. The letters looked like they were crawling across the screen, darker at the edges, as if the dark itself was trying to chew them. I threw the phone on the counter and turned on the little radio we kept for storms. At first it only hissed, then a voice cracked through. It was garbled, but the tone was sharp. Stay in the light. The dark is not absence. The dark is alive. The words cut off, replaced by static again, but they were enough to make my knees weak. The candles in the kitchen flickered harder, one after another, as though invisible hands were brushing past them. My sister sat clutching her flashlight against her chest, whispering to herself. She rocked slightly, muttering, "Keep them on, keep them on." I paced the kitchen, flipping switches back and forth just to make sure each bulb still worked. Every time one wavered, my heart jumped into my throat. Around midnight, the neighborhood was almost entirely gone. Only 3 houses still glowed on our street. I could see them faintly between the blinds, little squares of defiance surrounded by black. One blinked out right as I was watching, and my whole body jolted like it was mine. The dark swarmed in instantly, swallowing the house, the yard, the driveway. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. I sat back against the cabinet, staring at the row of flashlights I had lined on the counter. Their weight felt like a promise and a lie at the same time. Batteries drain, bulbs burn out, gas runs dry. The dark did not look tired, it looked patient. I tried to imagine the morning, the sun rising, lights spilling across the street. I tried to believe in it like I always had, as a given, something certain. But when I looked at the horizon through the curtain, I could not see a hint of gray, only black, thick and endless. And in that black, I swore I saw movement. Not shapes exactly, but a ripple, like water disturbed by something massive beneath it. My sister asked me if it would end when morning came. I told her yes, but when she finally fell asleep at the table with her head on her arms, I whispered to myself the answer I was afraid to say out loud. I did not know if morning would come at all. At 12:20, the sound of breaking glass cut through the hum of the house. It came from next door, sharp and clean, followed by a silence that pressed so heavy I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My sister jerked awake at the table, her flashlight beam scattering across the wall before she steadied it. We both froze, holding our breath, waiting for whatever came after. Mrs. Langley's house had gone dark half an hour earlier. I had seen her candle flare in the window for just a moment, her face pale against the glass, shadows curling behind her like a tide. Then the flame had gone out. Now the breaking glass told me the dark was not finished with her house yet. My stomach twisted as I realized it was moving, reshaping the place to suit itself. I crept toward the front window even though I knew better. Curiosity feels heavier than fear sometimes. I pulled one blind slat just enough to look through. The street was gone. Not just dark, gone, as though someone had erased it with a brush dipped in tar. The glow from our house made a weak island, and just beyond it the black was absolute. Mrs. Langley's house sat inside that void, its edges soft, like it was dissolving into the dark. The broken window gaped open, glass jagged like teeth. I wanted to look away, but something inside the room caught my eyes. At first I thought it was her. A figure stood near the window, unmoving, its head tilted toward me. But the proportions were wrong, the shoulders too wide, the arms too long. It leaned close to the glass, and the shadows wrapped it like a cloak. I stumbled back and let the blind snap shut. My sister whispered my name, but I could not speak. I just shook my head and pressed my hand against the wall, grounding myself with the solid feel of wood and paint. The shadows inside our house thickened after that, as if noticing I had noticed them. The corners of the ceiling darkened, and the baseboards looked like ink spilled across the floor. My sister's flashlight flickered once, and her gasp cracked the silence. I grabbed another from the counter and shoved it into her hands, my own fingers clumsy from panic. We kept both beams aimed at the kitchen doorway, where the dark pressed hardest. Then came the sound, not breaking glass this time, not footsteps. It was a low groan, like wood under weight, except it came from every direction at once. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all straining together, as though the house itself was leaning into the dark. My sister whimpered and pressed her back against the table leg. I crouched next to her, holding the flashlight steady, my other hand gripping the tire iron I had dragged from the garage earlier. I did not think it would help, but holding it made me feel less useless. At 12:40, the phone buzzed with another alert. The tone shrieked through the house, and the screen glowed red in my hand. Power failing across sectors. Shelter in place. Do not allow shadows to touch you. I read it out loud, my voice cracking on the last word. My sister shook her head violently, tears streaking her face. She whispered that she did not want to hear it anymore. I wanted to throw the phone away, but I could not. It was the only thing tethering us to the idea that someone else out there still knew what was happening. I lit more candles even though the flames bent under some invisible draft. The smell of wax thickened the air, sweet and cloying. The shadows recoiled at the firelight, but only slightly. They still pressed at the edges, patient. My sister asked if we could run to the car, drive somewhere brighter. I almost said yes just to give her hope, but I remembered the man across the street. One step into the dark, and he had been gone without a sound. I told her we had to stay put. That light was our only shield. She covered her face with her hands and nodded. small and broken. At 1, something new began. Faces. I saw them first in the shadows on the wall above the sink. At a glance, they were just flickers of movement, but when I stared, features formed. Eyes wide, mouths stretched open, teeth bared in silent screams, dozens of them layered together, shifting and merging. I tore my gaze away, my chest heaving, but when I looked down I saw more in the shadows on the tile. They stared up at me from the floor, distorted, hollow, each one caught mid-scream. I shouted at my sister not to look, but she already had. She sobbed, curling into herself, the flashlight beam shaking as her hands trembled. I forced myself to grab another candle and set it on the counter, the flame pushing the shadows back just far enough to smear the faces into blur. They did not vanish. They just waited, pressed flat against the edges of the light, patient as ever. The refrigerator groaned suddenly, the hum sputtering out. My heart dropped as the kitchen dimmed slightly. The bulb overhead flickered, fighting against the surge. I ran to the breaker box in the hall, yanking it open with hands that barely worked. The switches all sat straight, nothing tripped, nothing wrong. Still, the power wavered. I slammed the door shut and whispered over and over for the lights to hold. At 1:15, the voices started. Not whispers this time. Clearer, louder, threading through the hum of the bulbs. They spoke in overlapping tones, each word dragging. Most were sounds I could not make sense of, but woven inside them were names. My name, my sister's name, Mrs. Langley's name. The camper's girlfriend's name, though I did not know how I knew it belonged to her. The voices rose and fell like a chant, pressing closer with each repetition. My sister clamped her hands over her ears and screamed for them to stop. They did not. I shouted back, my own voice hoarse, trying to drown them out. My words were nonsense, just noise, but the moment I raised my voice, the bulbs surged brighter. The shadows writhed, recoiling slightly. I kept shouting until my throat burned, and when I stopped, silence dropped heavy again. My sister's sobs filled the kitchen. I knelt beside her, clutching her arm, whispering that we were still here, still in the light. By 1:30 the voices had faded, but the faces remained, patient in the corners, waiting for another flicker. The candles burned low, wax pooling on the counters. The stove hissed, flames still steady but dimmer than before. I stared at the horizon through a slit in the curtain. No hint of gray, no promise of morning. Just black, endless and deep, rippling faintly as though something massive moved beneath it. I wanted to believe we could outlast it, that the sun would rise and burn it away. But as I sat there clutching the tire iron, my throat raw from shouting, I felt the truth pressing in with the dark. This was not a storm or a blackout, this was something alive, and it was winning. By 1:45 the house felt like it was shrinking, the walls drawing closer as though the dark outside was pressing inward. The light still held, but every bulb hummed harder, the glow too hot, too thin, like they were fighting to stay alive. I walked room to room again, checking each lamp, each candle, each corner. My sister trailed behind me with her flashlight clutched to her chest, the beam shaking with her hands. She whispered constantly under her breath, keep them on, like a chant that might keep the walls from buckling. When I stepped into the living room, I froze. The shadows had pulled high along the wall opposite the window, stretching into long finger-like points that trembled just outside the circle of light. For a second I swore I saw a face between them, eyes white and wide, a mouth open in a scream I could not hear. Then the light steadied, and the shape smeared into nothing. I backed away, dragging my sister with me, her feet stumbling over the carpet. At 1:50 the phone buzzed again, the same shriek of an alert, the same red wash of color. I lifted it and read the new message aloud without thinking. Power failing across sectors. Shelter in place. Do not allow shadows to touch you. It was almost word for word the same as the last one. The repetition made it worse, like they did not have anything new to say because the truth was too big to put on a screen. My sister pressed her hands to her ears and begged me not to read them anymore. I nodded, though I knew I would not be able to ignore the next one. At 2, the refrigerator died completely. The hum faded into silence, and the smell of ozone thickened in the air. The overhead bulb in the kitchen flickered hard enough that the shadows surged across the floor, reaching nearly to my sister's feet. She screamed and scrambled onto a chair, her flashlight beam cutting through the dark just enough to force it back. I grabbed the row of flashlights from the counter and handed her a second one, then switched on 2 more and aimed them at the corners. The beams lit the dust floating in the air, a thin haze that sparkled in the light. The shadows recoiled again, but they did not leave. They waited at the edges, trembling like they were breathing. I lit more candles, even the ones so small they barely made a glow. The flames bent hard to one side as though wind pushed them, though the windows were closed tight. Wax spilled down their sides and hissed against the counters. The stove burners hissed weaker, their blue flames shrinking. I twisted the knobs higher, but they did not respond. Panic climbed up my throat. If the gas ran out, if the power died, what then? At 2:10 the radio crackled alive. The static hissed loud, then a voice broke through, sharp and uneven. "This is not a blackout," it said. "This is not a containment breach. The dark is alive. Do not let it touch you." Then the static swallowed it again. My sister buried her face in her hands and sobbed. I sat frozen with the radio pressed against my chest, my breath shallow, the words burning into me. Not a blackout, not a breach, alive. I wanted to scream at the voice, to beg for more, for something to do, some way out. But the radio stayed dead, and the static filled the silence like a tide. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. I set it back on the counter and wrapped both arms around my sister, whispering over and over that we just had to last until morning. The words felt like lies as I said them. At 2:20 the living room lamp flickered again. The shadows rose in response, crawling up the wall in long streams. In the glow I saw faces again, dozens of them layered together, mouths open in silent wails. They pressed forward, flattening against the light, their features smearing like wet paint. My sister aimed her flashlight at them and screamed, and for a moment they rippled back. Then they surged forward again, patient, endless. I dragged her into the hallway and shut the living room door. The shadows slipped through the crack at the bottom anyway, thin tendrils stretching across the floor. I shoved a towel against the gap, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. The tendrils stopped, pressed tight against the fabric, but did not pull back. They waited there, shifting faintly, like worms in soil. At 2:30 the alert came again. The red glow washed my hands, and the words made my stomach collapse. This is not a blackout. This is not temporary. The dark is expanding beyond control. Do not attempt to leave your home. The daylight will not return. I read it aloud before I could stop myself. My sister screamed and threw her flashlight at me, the beam spinning across the floor. She shouted that I was lying, that the sun would come. It always came. She collapsed onto the floor, rocking back and forth, clutching her knees. I wanted to comfort her, to believe her, but the words on the screen burned into me. The daylight will not return. The bulbs overhead flickered again, harder this time, their hum high and strained. My skin prickled with heat, and sweat rolled down my neck. The light felt too hot, too desperate, like it was burning itself alive to keep the dark out. I turned in circles, checking every corner, every baseboard. The shadows pressed tight against the edges, thick and patient. They did not need to rush. They had forever. At 2:40 the phone buzzed again, but I did not pick it up. I shoved it into a drawer and slammed it shut. My sister asked what it said, her voice sharp, demanding. I told her nothing new, just the same warning. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she saw through me. But then she turned away, muttering to herself. The house hummed, the lights burned, and the dark pressed close. My throat ached from whispering the same words again and again. Keep them on. Do not let it touch you. Survive until daylight, even though daylight had already been taken from us. At 2:50 the silence broke with a single sound, a whisper. Not outside, not through the walls. Inside, low and steady, curling up from the floorboards. It shaped my name slowly, dragging each syllable. My sister froze, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. Then the whisper changed, shaping her name in my voice. She whimpered and pressed her hands to her ears, shaking her head. The whisper grew louder, more voices joining in, until the whole kitchen floor seemed to breathe our names. I dropped to my knees and pressed the flashlights against the tiles, the beams cutting across the floor. The voices hissed, retreating slightly, but they did not stop. They circled us, layered and heavy. I gripped the tire iron and swung it once against the floor, the metal ringing through the house. The voices paused, then fell silent. The silence pressed in harder than before, but it was empty now, not full of sound. The shadows trembled at the edges of the light. My sister clutched my arm so tight her nails dug into my skin. We sat like that, waiting, every second a wait. The clock ticked toward 3, and I told myself if we could make it through the next hour, we could make it through anything. But deep down, I already knew the truth. There was no more morning waiting for us. The dark had already won. By 3 o'clock, the house felt less like shelter and more like a trap we had built ourselves into. Every light hummed with a high strained pitch, the bulbs so hot I worried they would burst. The candles on the counter had burned low, their wax puddling across plates and dripping onto the floor. The smell of smoke and hot metal hung thick in the air, clinging to the back of my throat. My sister sat at the table with both flashlights gripped tight, her face pale in the glow. She had stopped whispering her mantra. Now she only rocked slowly, staring at the ceiling like she expected it to split open. I forced myself to keep moving through the house, checking each room even though I knew what I would see. The shadows pressed in at every edge, piled thick against the corners, swelling and shifting like breath. When I shined the flashlight directly at them, they smeared back a few inches, but as soon as I moved the beam, they surged forward again, hungry and patient. The bathroom mirror reflected them in ways that made no sense, stretching their forms into things that looked half human, half something else. I draped a towel over it and slammed the door shut. At 3:15, another alert shrieked across my phone. I hesitated before picking it up, my stomach twisting, but I could not ignore it. The screen glowed red and the words crawled across it. If your lights fail, you will not be recovered. Shelter in place. This is not reversible. The daylight is gone. I read it aloud without meaning to. My sister's face crumpled. She dropped one flashlight and covered her ears, rocking harder. She shouted at me that I was lying, that the sun had to rise, it always had. Her voice cracked with desperation. I crouched beside her and told her I only read what was there, but the words felt thin. I held her arm until her breathing slowed, but her eyes were wild, staring past me into the corners where the dark pressed hardest. The radio crackled again, faint through the static. I grabbed it, pressing it to my ear. A voice bled through, low and urgent. Do not allow shadows to touch you. They are not shadows. They are remnants. They are the dark itself. The voice warped, then cut off into hiss. I shook the radio, begging for more, but nothing came back. My sister asked what it said. I told her nothing important. She glared at me, like she knew I was lying. At 3:30, the stove burners went out one by one, the blue flames shrinking to pinpricks before vanishing with a hiss. My heart jumped into my throat. I twisted the knobs until my fingers hurt, but nothing came back. The last steady fire was gone. The shadows pressed closer almost instantly, their edges stretching toward the counters, creeping like spilled oil. I grabbed 2 more candles and lit them, my hands shaking so badly the matches snapped. The flames bent hard to the side, straining as if against wind, but they held. The living room lamp flickered again, dimming so much that for one horrible second, the wall disappeared entirely into black. When it steadied again, there were faces pressed against the glass of the window, dozens of them, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. My knees buckled. I stumbled back, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. The faces did not move. They only stared, their features blurring as the light fought to keep them out. I slammed the curtain shut and shoved the sofa against the window, as though fabric and wood could matter against whatever was out there. By 3:40, my sister had started muttering again, her voice low and broken. She whispered that the dark was whispering back to her, that it was saying her name in my voice. I told her not to listen, to cover her ears, but she shook her head and said it was inside already. that blocking her ears would not help. I could not argue. I felt it too, a pressure in my skull, words threaded into my bones. They whispered my name in her tone, slow and patient. They told me to give up, that the light could not last. I staggered into my room to grab more candles, the lamp buzzing so hard I thought the bulb would pop. The thick corner I had noticed earlier was larger now, spilling halfway across the floor. My books lay scattered where I had tried to stack them against it, their covers swallowed by black. The shadow writhed when my light hit it, shapes moving inside like bodies pressed against glass. I backed out quickly, clutching the candles to my chest, my breath loud and ragged. At 3:50 the phone buzzed again. I did not want to look, but I did. The words were shorter this time, colder. The dark has spread. Containment failed. There is no morning. The screen dimmed after that, the glow weak, as though even the battery was being eaten away. I dropped it on the counter and shoved it face down. My sister asked what it said, and I lied. I told her it was the same as before. She nodded, her face slack, and turned her flashlight beam toward the ceiling, watching as the shadows rippled across it like water. The candles were burning low, wax spilling down their sides in thick rivers. The bulbs overhead flickered in waves, each one dimming for a heartbeat before surging back, weaker each time. The air grew hotter, the smell of burning metal thick enough to sting my eyes. Sweat soaked my shirt, plastered my hair to my forehead. The hum of the electricity was a scream now, loud and desperate, like the wires were tearing themselves apart to keep the dark from swallowing us. At 4 o'clock the first bulb blew. A sharp pop, glass raining onto the floor, the kitchen plunging half into shadow. The dark surged immediately, tendrils stretching across the counter, curling toward the table where my sister sat. She shrieked and swung her flashlight beam, the light cutting across the tendrils. They hissed and recoiled, but they did not retreat entirely. They lingered just beyond the glow, waiting for the batteries to die. I scrambled for another lamp, dragging it across the floor and plugging it in. The bulb glowed weak but steady, enough to push the shadows back. My sister sobbed, clutching my arm, her nails digging into my skin. She whispered over and over that the sun would come, that we only had to last until morning. I could not bring myself to tell her the truth of what the alerts had said. I could not take that from her. The house felt smaller with each passing minute, the dark swelling against the walls, pressing against the windows. The faces in the glass grew clearer, their mouths wider, their eyes hollow. The whisper in my skull grew louder, threading my name with hers, telling us to open the door, to let the dark in, to stop fighting. My throat ached from whispering back, keep them on, as though saying it could make it true. At 4:15 the clock on the wall stopped ticking. The second hand froze mid-step, and the hum of the house seemed to pause with it. My sister looked at me, her eyes wide, and whispered that time had stopped. I shook my head and told her it was just the batteries, but my voice cracked. I knew she was right. The dark pressed harder, the light burned hotter, and I realized the fight was not about waiting until morning anymore. There was no morning. There was only the question of how long we could keep the glow alive before the dark claimed what it had already won. I tightened my grip on the tire iron and forced myself to breathe. If this was the end, I wanted to meet it awake. By 4:30 the house was a furnace of light. Every lamp, every bulb, every candle that had not already burned to nothing was working at once, glowing with a strained, feverish heat. The air shimmered faintly, thick with the smell of wax and scorched metal, but the darkness still pressed at the edges of every room. It was no longer just waiting outside the windows. It was everywhere, reaching through cracks in the floorboards, seeping down the walls, slithering under door frames. I could see it shifting like liquid, stretching long fingers into the narrow strips where light did not quite touch. My sister sat hunched at the kitchen table, clutching her last flashlight. Her eyes were hollow and red, her lips moving in a whisper I could not hear. She had stopped speaking to me directly. Every so often her head would twitch toward a corner, as though she were listening to someone else entirely. I tried to reach for her arm, to anchor her, but she jerked away. her gaze fixed on the dark seam where the wall met the floor. I did not press again. The shadows had grown bolder. They no longer recoiled fully when the beams hit them. They lingered, trembling, testing the edges of the glow. The flashlight beams seemed weaker too, the circles smaller and less sharp, as if the batteries were bleeding out faster than they should. I checked the row of spares I had lined up earlier. 2 already flickered when I tested them, even though they had been fresh hours ago. It was as if the dark was drinking the energy out of them just by being near. At 4:40 another alert screamed from my phone, the sound shrill enough to make me flinch. The screen lit my face, and for a moment I considered not looking, but the need to know burned stronger than my fear. The words crawled across the red background. The dark has spread beyond recovery. Do not attempt evacuation, do not attempt prayer. It hears you. I stared at that last line until the letters blurred. My chest tightened as if invisible hands were squeezing my ribs. Do not attempt prayer. It hears you. That meant it was not only alive, it was aware, listening. I dropped the phone onto the counter face down, but the words had already burned into me. My sister must have read it in my face. She asked in a shaking voice what it had said. I told her it was the same as before, but she laughed, a hollow, brittle sound that did not sound like her at all. She said I was lying, that she could hear it already, that it was in every shadow and every flicker. I tried to argue, but the words felt weak. She was not wrong. I could feel it too, the low thrum in my bones, the whisper coiled in the back of my skull. At 4:45, the second bulb in the kitchen popped. The sound was sharp and wet, the glass raining across the counter. Darkness surged instantly toward the gap, swallowing half the room before I managed to shove another lamp closer. The glow pushed it back, but not completely. The outlines of faces hovered in the black, mouths stretched wide, teeth sharp and glinting faintly in the candlelight. They did not move. They only waited, pressed against the wall of light as though the glass between us was thinning. The radio hissed alive again. I grabbed it with both hands, desperate for another voice, for proof that someone else was still out there. Static filled the air, then words slid through, slow and broken. The dark is not outside. The dark is inside. It was always here. Then silence again. I shook the radio until my hands ached, but nothing more came. The words sat heavy in my chest. It was not just pressing against us. It was woven into everything. Every corner that light did not reach. Maybe it always had been. By 4:50, my sister stood suddenly, knocking her chair over. Her flashlight beam swung wildly across the kitchen, then landed on the hallway. She whispered my name in a tone that made my stomach drop. I followed her gaze. The hallway light flickered hard, dimmed, and for a split second, the dark spilled across the floor in a flood. When the bulb steadied, something stood there, a shape. Tall, thin, its limbs too long, its head cocked at a wrong angle. The shadows clung to it like cloth. I blinked hard, and it was gone, leaving only the trembling glow of the bulb. My sister swore it had said her name. I told her not to listen, but she shook her head and said it was my voice. She said she would know it anywhere. I grabbed her shoulders, forced her to look at me, to hear me. I told her I had not spoken. She stared into my face like she was searching for proof. For a moment I thought she might believe me. Then the bulb flickered again and she screamed, breaking free of my grip. She bolted toward her room before I could stop her. I shouted her name until my throat tore, but she did not turn back. The shadows surged down the hallway, swallowing the walls, the floor, everything. I ran after her, flashlight beam slicing through the black. I caught a glimpse of her at her doorway, her flashlight beam cutting across the dark. Then the bulb in the hall blew, and the world folded into black. For a few endless seconds there was nothing but her scream. It ripped through the house, high and raw, then cut off so suddenly I stumbled forward in shock. My flashlight shook in my hands, the beam bouncing across the hallway. Her door stood open. The room was empty, no sign of her, no sound, just the press of the dark, waiting. I backed away, gasping, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. My chest burned with panic, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me back toward the kitchen, back to the glow of the last surviving lamps. I slammed the hallway door shut and shoved the sofa against it, my breath ragged, my body shaking so hard I could barely stand. The silence that followed was worse than the scream. It was thick and endless, as if the house itself was holding its breath. At 4:55, the final alert came. The phone screamed again, and I forced myself to look. Containment failed. The dark is all. Keep lights on until depletion. It cannot be stopped. The words swam on the screen, my vision blurring with tears. My sister was gone, swallowed by something I could not fight, and the alerts told me the truth I had already felt. This was not a night to outlast. This was the new world. I sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by flickering lamps and candles, the flashlight beam trembling across my knees. The dark pressed against the windows, the walls, the ceiling, patient and endless. The light hissed and buzzed, weaker with every second. I whispered my sister's name until my voice broke, but there was no answer. By 5 o'clock I was alone. Alone with the glow, alone with the hum, and alone with the truth that the sun would never rise again. The dark had already spread, and all I could do was sit there, clinging to the last sparks of light, and wait for them to burn out. By 5:15 I could not tell if the lights were dimming because the electricity was dying, or because my eyes were failing. Every bulb still burned, but the glow seemed weaker, stretched thin across the walls. The shadows pressed close, heavy as wet cloth, their edges rippling like they were breathing. The whispers inside my skull had grown constant, a low static that bent into words only when I tried not to listen. My sister's voice threaded through them, soft and steady, calling my name with the same rhythm she used when we were kids playing in the yard. I wanted to run to her, to believe she was just down the hall waiting for me, but the truth was carved into the silence that followed her scream. She was gone, folded into the dark like the neighbors, like the man across the street, like Mrs. Langley. I was the last one left in this little island of light, and the island was shrinking. The radio hissed faintly from the counter, static rising and falling like breath. I pressed my ear close, desperate for another voice, but nothing clear came through. Just fragments, warped syllables that sounded too much like the voices in the dark. I shut it off and shoved it aside. There was no one left to speak to me. The candles had burned down to nubs. Wax pooled across the counters in hardened rivers, dripping onto the floor where it stuck my shoes with every step. I blew one out deliberately, testing myself, and instantly the shadows surged forward, filling the gap with a hungry shiver. Faces swam inside it, their mouths wide, their eyes white and endless. I lit the wick again with shaking hands, and the darkness recoiled. The lesson was clear. As long as there was light, I still had a barrier. As long as there was light, I still existed. At 5:30 another bulb popped, this one over the kitchen table, raining shards across my sister's chair. I flinched hard enough to stumble, my flashlight beam swinging wide across the room. The shadows poured toward the table, thick and alive, curling up the legs of the chair like vines. I aimed the flashlight at them and they hissed back, retreating only inches. I whispered her name under my breath, though I did not know if I meant my sister's or my own. The phone buzzed on the counter. The final alert. I knew it before I even picked it up. The screen glowed weak, its battery nearly gone. The message was short. The sun will not rise. The dark is permanent. Keep light until depletion. Prepare acceptance. My hand shook so hard I nearly dropped it. Prepare acceptance. The words were sharper than any warning that had come before. They did not tell me to fight. They did not tell me to survive. They told me to give in, to accept what was coming. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall, to deny it, but the truth sat heavy in my chest. I could not stop what was happening. I could only choose how to face it. I turned off the phone and set it face down. The hum of the lamps filled the silence again, a strained buzz like insects beating against glass. My eyes burned from the brightness, my skin hot, my throat raw from whispering the same words again and again. Keep them on. Do not let it touch you. Survive until morning, even though morning was gone. At 5:40, the refrigerator groaned once, then died completely. The air inside the house shifted, heavier, colder, even though the lights still burned. The shadows pressed harder against the windows, their forms clearer than ever. Faces, bodies, limbs bent wrong. They stood in clusters, staring in, their mouths open in perfect silence. They did not need sound anymore. I could hear them inside my head, whispering my name in my own voice, telling me it would be easier if I just let the lights go out. I sat on the kitchen floor with the tire iron across my knees, the flashlight beam trembling across my lap. My sister's chair loomed empty in front of me, shards of glass scattered across its seat. I stared at it until my vision blurred, remembering her voice, her laugh, the way she had rocked slowly, whispering, "Keep them on." I whispered it too, softer now, a thread of sound in the hum of the light. At 5:50 the last candle guttered out, the flame bent sideways, sputtered, then vanished. The shadows surged instantly, filling the gap, their forms pressing against the counter, against the floor, against my legs. I swung the flashlight beam toward them and they hissed back, retreating only inches. The bulb above me buzzed high and sharp, trembling so hard I thought it would burst. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. I thought about my sister, about the neighbors, about the faces in the glass. I thought about mornings that had always come without question, the sun rising steady no matter what had happened in the night. I thought about how easily we had trusted that light would always return. When I opened my eyes again, the shadows were still there, pressed tight against the edge of the glow, their faces twisted and endless, but I was calm now. The fear had burned itself out, replaced by a steady quiet. I understood what the last message had meant. There was no more running, no more fighting. There was only acceptance. At 6 o'clock, the bulb above me finally burst. A sharp crack, glass raining down, the room plunging into black. The flashlight in my hand flickered once, twice, then went out too. The hum of electricity died with it. For the first time all night there was no glow, no barrier, no separation. Only dark, alive and endless, folding over me like water. I did not scream. I did not fight. I let the dark take me, the whispers swelling into silence. And in that silence, for the first time since the alerts began, I felt still. The lights were gone. The sun was gone, but I was no longer alone. The world had ended not with fire, not with flood, but with the quiet truth that the dark had always been here, waiting. Now it had spread, and there was nothing left to resist. The fight was over. And strangely, that was enough. I've been driving for rideshare apps off and on for a couple of years, nights mostly. It fits my schedule, and frankly, people are quieter after midnight. Less small talk, more silence. I liked that. The quiet, the dark, it helped me think. That night started like any other. A few airport runs. Some drunk college kids who wanted to stop for fast food. A guy in a suit who didn't say a word but left $100 tip. Routine. I'd just dropped someone off on the edge of the city, near the industrial park, those wide roads that look like they go on forever, half-lit and echoey, even when your engine's idling. I remember thinking it was later than usual, around 2:30 a.m., maybe closer to 3. I pulled over near a small gravel pullout to stretch my legs, check my phone, maybe call it for the night. That's when I got the ping. The screen lit up with a single word, pick up. No name, no photo, no rating, just a location, a nearby side road that led into the hills. Weird, but not impossible. The app glitches sometimes. I figured it was a one-off. Maybe a tourist who couldn't get a signal. Maybe a dead zone threw off the map. But the thing was, it didn't ask me to accept the ride. No green button, no confirmation. It was just there. Already marked, in progress. I should have driven off. I should have closed the app and gone home. But something about it held me. That little pin blinking slowly on the map like it was waiting for me. I sat there for a solid minute, staring at the screen. Then, before I really made a conscious choice, I shifted into drive and headed toward it. The pickup point wasn't far, just a quarter-mile down a winding road, no streetlights, trees lining both sides, heavy and still. I turned the music off without really thinking about it. Just wanted to hear the world around me. There was a figure standing at the side of the road when I pulled up. A man, tall, pale, wearing a dark coat that looked too thin for the cold. He didn't have any luggage or a phone out, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, staring straight ahead like he'd been waiting for something more than just a ride. I leaned over and cracked the window. "You, call a ride?" He didn't look at me, just nodded once, slowly, and walked around to the back door, got in without a word. I glanced in the rear view. He buckled his seatbelt carefully, almost mechanically, and stared out the front windshield. Never met my eyes. I cleared my throat. "All right, where to?" "East," he said. His voice was low, even and dry. "Keep going. I'll tell you when to stop." I hesitated. "You got an address?" "Just drive." Now, I've had some weird passengers before. One guy who insisted I take only left turns. A woman who cried silently the entire ride and tipped me in foreign coins. But this guy, there was something different. It wasn't the way he talked or didn't talk. It was the weight of him. Like he pulled the air down around him, like the car had gotten colder when he got in. Still, I pulled away. We drove in silence for a while. 15 minutes. Maybe 20. The city fell behind us. The road narrowed. No signs, no traffic. Just 2 yellow lines leading us through the dark. I started to feel wrong. Not scared exactly, just off. Like I wasn't supposed to be here. Finally, I tried to break the silence. "So, you visiting from out of town?" "Nothing. Been a quiet night," I said. "You're probably my last ride." He didn't even blink, just kept staring forward, both hands clenched tightly on his seatbelt, white-knuckled, like he was bracing for impact. I glanced at him again through the mirror. "You okay, man?" That's when he spoke, quiet, measured, but firm. "Keep going, even if it feels wrong." The words landed like a weight in my chest. "What does that mean?" "Silence." I gripped the wheel tighter. The road was winding now, climbing steadily uphill. Trees pressed in on both sides. No houses, no lights. Just that long stretch of 2-lane blacktop, disappearing into dark woods. I checked my phone. No signal, no map. The app had closed itself out. "All right, look," I said, slowing down a bit. "I need a destination. I can't just keep driving into the middle of nowhere. I'm gonna pull over unless you tell me where we're going." He didn't move, didn't speak, just kept staring straight ahead. That's when I looked in the mirror again. He wasn't breathing. I don't mean he was holding his breath or anything. I mean he wasn't moving at all. No rise and fall in his chest. No shifting in his seat. Just stillness. Dead stillness. "Hey," I said, my voice sharper now. "I'm serious. This isn't funny." Still nothing. I pulled the car over onto the dirt shoulder and threw it in park, turned around fully in my seat. "Listen, man, I don't know what this is, but the back seat was empty. My mouth went dry. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I blinked, looked again. Nothing. The seatbelt was still buckled. I threw the door open and stumbled out of the car, my shoes crunching on gravel. I opened the rear door. No one. The seat was warm. And there, on the floor, was a single thing I hadn't noticed before. A small, cracked phone. No case, no lock screen, just a dead screen. I picked it up, hands shaking, pressed the power button. Nothing. I stood there for a long moment, in the cold, under a sky full of stars I hadn't even realized were there. And from somewhere deeper in the woods, I thought I heard footsteps. But they were walking away. Not toward me. I didn't get back in the car right away. I just stood there, holding that old phone, trying to convince myself that maybe I'd just been tired, that the man had gotten out quietly, that I'd imagined his voice, that I'd misunderstood the whole thing. But that wasn't true, because I remember what he said. Keep going, even if it feels wrong. And I'd never said a word about it, not until now. I got back in the car after maybe 10 minutes of standing there. Could have been longer, could have been less. Time had started to feel a little stretchy out there, like the woods had their own clock and I wasn't on it. I was still holding the dead phone in my hand. I didn't know why I'd taken it with me. Maybe because I didn't want to leave it behind. Maybe because part of me thought it would light up and explain everything. It didn't. I started the engine, half expecting it not to turn over, but it purred to life like it always did, normal, familiar. The heater clicked on, blowing stale warm air into my face. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror for a few seconds. My eyes looked strange, hollow. I looked like I hadn't slept in days. I took a deep breath and pulled back onto the road, heading toward the city. I didn't look in the back seat. Couldn't. It was like a rule I didn't know I'd agreed to. The drive back was silent, too silent. No bugs, no owls, no trees rustling like they should have been. Even the tires seemed quieter than normal. I kept glancing at the dash clock every few minutes. But it was stuck, said it was 2:39 a.m. the whole way back, even though I knew I'd been gone longer than that. Eventually I made it back into cell range, and my phone buzzed violently in my pocket like it had been holding its breath. Notifications poured in, texts, app updates, a voicemail from my brother asking if I was still coming over the next day. I opened the rideshare app first. No record of the trip. No fare, no pickup history, no in-progress ride. My last logged trip had been the airport drop-off 2 hours before I'd met him. Nothing in between. I sat at a red light near the edge of town, blinking at the screen. I hadn't imagined it. The warmth of the back seat, the words he spoke, the sound of his voice, they were all still with me, heavy and clear. I tried the GPS history. Nothing. No route saved, just the line from my last legitimate fare. No winding road, no pin. I turned the cracked phone over in my hand again. It had no branding, no SIM card slot, just a faint indentation on the back like it had been jammed into something hard. I tried pressing the power button again. Still nothing. I opened the glove box and tossed it in, slammed it shut harder than I meant to. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, not right away. What would I even say? That I'd picked up a passenger who vanished in thin air. That I'd followed a ghost into the woods because my app glitched. That his last words made my chest feel like it was being crushed. I drove home and sat in the driveway until the sun came up. Then I went inside and showered with the door open. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The next day, I found muddy footprints on my welcome mat, not mine, too small, too narrow. I'd cleaned the place the day before. They hadn't been there then. They led right up to the door and stopped, no matching prints leading away, just a single trail in and nothing else. That night, my hallway light turned on by itself around 2 a.m. I heard the click from my bedroom. I live alone. I keep the hallway switch taped because it used to flicker and drive me nuts. It didn't flicker this time, just glowed solid. A few nights later, I was driving again. I'd taken a break from rideshare, but figured I needed to push past it, get back to normal. It was late, and I was doing a loop around the city when I got a ping. This time it came through the right way: name, pickup location, destination. I checked the name. Noah. The same name from the cracked phone's lock screen. I hadn't told anyone about it. I hadn't even opened the glove box since. I let the request expire without accepting. My heart was racing. It was probably coincidence. There are thousands of Noahs, but I couldn't bring myself to take the risk. The next day, I opened the glove box and pulled out the phone again. Still dead, still cracked. But this time, when I tilted it toward the light, I saw something I hadn't before. Faint. Like it had been written in dust or grease on the screen's edge. Finish the job. I dropped it like it burned. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My apartment was quiet, but too quiet. Like everything was waiting. At exactly 2:39 a.m., my bedroom light turned on. Not flickered. Turned on. There was no click, no sound, just light. I sat up slowly, chest pounding. The hallway was dark, the door was open, I hadn't left it open. And for a second, just a second, I swear I saw someone standing at the end of the hall. Tall, still, watching. Then the light went off. I didn't get out of bed. The next morning I opened my rideshare app and deleted it. But it reinstalled itself that night. I don't know how. I didn't touch it. It came back with a single notification. You still have one ride left. I haven't driven since. But I keep seeing him. Not just at night, during the day too. Reflected in windows, in the shadows behind parked cars, standing at bus stops, looking the wrong direction, not moving, just waiting. I tried talking to a friend about it, told him about the strange ride, left out the supernatural parts. He laughed it off, said I needed sleep. That night, he called me. Said he'd gotten a ride request. No name, no destination. Just a pickup point in the woods outside the city. He didn't take it. But when he got home, there was a single word written in dust on his windshield. Go. It's spreading. And I think I know why. That man Noah, whatever he wasn't just a passenger. He was something else. and now he's looking for someone new. I've always thought I was a pretty logical person, like not the type to fall into ghost stories or superstition. I'm the kind of guy who triple checks facts before believing anything, especially the weird stuff. So trust me when I say if I could write this off as a dream, or stress, or sleep deprivation, I would. I've tried, believe me. But every time I start to convince myself I imagined it, something else happens. Something small, something subtle, but just real enough to snap me back into it. I didn't even tell my friend Jason the full story at first. I just said I'd had a weird ride one night, and the guy creeped me out. Told him the guy had no destination and said something unsettling. Jason just laughed it off, like I expected. Said maybe the dude was on something. And yeah, to be fair, I've had people get in my car higher than a kite before. Happens. But this wasn't that. I thought about telling him more. About the app glitch, the man disappearing, the cracked phone. But the minute I imagined the words coming out of my mouth, I could already hear the reply, "Dude, you need to sleep." And maybe I did, still do. But then Jason called me. That was 3 nights ago. His voice was different on the phone, quieter. He didn't make a joke, which for him is like a cat not hissing. Something had to be seriously off. He told me he got a ride request late at night, just like I had. No name, no destination, just a blinking pickup pin. And it wasn't even on the map, it was in that weird gray no man's land, where the roads kind of blur and the app stutters. He didn't take it. He said the second he saw it, his stomach dropped. Felt like the air got thicker, he said, like something was watching through the screen. And that would have been bad enough. But then he got home and found one word scrawled into the grime on his windshield. Go. Not something you can laugh off. He was freaked. I could hear it in his voice. I asked if he still had the message, and he said no. He wiped it off right away. I get that. I would have too. That's when I told him everything. Not just the creepy ride, but the missing record, the empty back seat, the cold silence, the same line the guy whispered, "Keep going, even if it feels wrong." I told him about the cracked phone I still had stashed in my glove box, and how it never turned on, but had that faint scrawl on the glass. Finish the job. And Jason went dead silent for like 30 seconds. Then he just said, "Man, I think you passed it on." I didn't have a response for that. I spent the next day doing what I always do. When something doesn't make sense, I Googled it. I started looking into similar stories. I dug through forums, Reddit threads, even creepypasta sites I normally roll my eyes at. I didn't care. I just wanted to find someone who'd experienced something even remotely like what I did. And I found a few. Scattered comments, buried deep under unrelated posts, people talking about ghost fairs, passengers vanishing mid-trip, GPS routes leading nowhere, clocks freezing at weird times. One post stuck out. A guy from New Mexico, username long deleted, wrote that he'd been driving late one night when he got a ride request that came through, already marked in progress. He picked up a man who said, "It's not about the destination, just keep going." The man never made eye contact, never spoke again. That driver said he made it 30 miles outside the city before realizing he wasn't following any road he recognized. Then his app crashed. And when he looked in the back seat, the man was gone. Just like me. He ended the post with, "Now it's my turn to find someone else. Because that's how it works. I didn't finish the job, so it's not over." And yeah, I know how it sounds. Like a chain letter, or some urban legend. A dumb story meant to get a rise out of people, but it didn't feel like that. The way it was written, the tone, the pacing, it didn't read like fiction. It felt like someone unraveling, someone real. Someone like me. I couldn't stop thinking about the phrase, "finish the job." What does that even mean? Is it literal, metaphorical? Am I supposed to do something or not do something? The not knowing is the worst part. That night, I went out to my car again, just to sit, just to, I don't know, feel connected to what happened, I guess. I didn't turn on the engine. Just sat in the driver's seat, staring at the dashboard, like it might blink to life and explain things. I was there for maybe 10 minutes when the smell hit me. It wasn't strong, not at first, just a faint scent in the air, like dirt, wet, earthy dirt, the kind that smells like it was just turned, like something had been buried and recently dug back up. It wasn't there before. I checked under the seats, floor mats, glove box, nothing. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing in the seat. But it looked off. The seat belt. It was buckled again. I know I unbuckled it. I remember it being loose. But now it was perfectly fastened. I got out of the car so fast I nearly tripped over myself. I didn't even lock the doors behind me, just went back inside and slammed the front door like it could stop whatever was happening. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that back seat, the way he sat there, so still, like he was waiting. For what? I have no clue. But it's like the moment you notice something is wrong and can't unsee it, that gut-level panic that makes your spine feel hollow. The next morning, my phone had a new notification. The rideshare app had reinstalled itself, again. Same message. One ride left. And this time, the pickup pin? It was right outside my apartment. Like 20 feet from my front door. I watched it blink on the screen for over an hour. I never opened the door, never checked outside. I was scared, not just scared, but that weird kind of fear where it feels like you're on the edge of something. Like if you look, you'll see, and once you see, you'll never unsee it again. That's where I'm at now, writing this. I haven't left my place in 2 days. I turned off my phone, threw the cracked one in the trash behind a grocery store 2 towns over. I've locked the doors, closed the curtains. I haven't dared peek outside after sunset. But I still feel him. I don't know if he's waiting for me to drive again, or if he's already inside. Maybe that's what they mean by finish the job. You drive long enough, and eventually he stops being the passenger and becomes the one behind the wheel. I don't really know what normal looks like anymore. Before all this, I used to have routines. Morning started with a strong cup of gas station coffee, followed by a scroll through my messages, checking rideshare bonuses or promotional boosts for the day. Then I'd head out, drive around the city, maybe pick up 5 or 6 passengers before lunch, take a break, back at it until midnight if the tips were decent. That was my life. Simple, repetitive, predictable, Now I wake up and the first thing I do is check the locks. Not my phone, not my email, just the locks. Then I go to the window and stare at the street like it's going to move, like it might change. I know that sounds weird, but after everything I've told you, you can probably understand why. 2 nights ago, I found my car unlocked. That might not sound like a big deal, but I always lock it, always. It's automatic at this point. It's like muscle memory. I press the fob before I even get out sometimes. But that night, I looked out my window and saw the driver's side door was cracked open just an inch. Just enough to be obvious, enough to make a statement. I didn't go down to check right away. I stood behind the curtain, staring at it like it might close by itself if I waited long enough. I didn't move for a solid 15 minutes. My hands were shaking the whole time. Eventually, I forced myself to go down. I brought my phone in one hand and a hammer in the other, which is dumb because I've never hit anyone in my life and probably wouldn't know how. But I needed something, you know, something to make me feel like I had control. The car was empty. Clean even, like too clean. The passenger seat looked freshly wiped. The back seat was pristine, no wrappers, no receipts, no trace of life, except for one thing. A single ride receipt had been printed and placed on the dashboard, like old school cab receipts, except I didn't have a printer in the car. I don't even own a printer. It had no date, no location, just a name, Noah, and under it, one line, trip incomplete. That was when I realized I wasn't just being haunted, I was being tracked, monitored maybe, or chosen. And here's the thing, I never picked a guy named Noah up, not officially, not on any log, not on any record, but I remember him, the way he looked straight ahead, never blinking, the way his hands gripped the seatbelt like he was holding on for more than just the ride. I tried looking him up, I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I could find something in obituary, a missing persons report, it would make this feel less insane. Like there was a reason, something I could hold on to. I didn't find anything useful, but I did find something. A post on an old paranormal forum, dated 5 years ago. Title was simple, Rideshare Glitch Anyone Else? I clicked it. Most of the replies were jokes or people sharing creepy stories that were clearly fake. But the original post? It was different. The guy described a night almost identical to mine. Passenger shows up without a request. Long silent ride, gives no destination, repeats the line, keep going, even if it feels wrong. Ends the post by saying he saw the man again a few days later, standing outside his apartment. The post ends with, I think I picked up something I wasn't meant to. It's not a person, it's a job that passes on. I didn't finish it, so now it's following me. That part hit hard, because yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. Like I got handed a task I never signed up for, and every time I ignore it, every time I pretend I'm not part of it, something else goes wrong. Jason hasn't answered my texts in 2 days. Last I heard from him, he said the rideshare app reinstalled itself on his phone again, just like mine. He didn't even open it. Just powered the phone off and tossed it in a drawer. I called him yesterday, straight to voicemail. His social media is still up, but no new posts. I even DM'd his girlfriend, asking if he was all right. She replied with just one sentence. He said he was going for a drive. That was 2 nights ago. That same night, my doorbell rang at exactly 3:14 a.m. I didn't get up to answer it, just lay there under the covers, holding my breath. It rang once, then silence. I waited until the sun came up before checking the front step. Nothing was there, except for tire tracks in the street, right in front of my driveway. Not mine. I've thought a lot about what the rules are, if there are any. Like, what happens if I do pick someone up again? What if I go back to that place where I first found him and wait? Would that end it? Or would it make it worse? The note said, finish the job. But what job? Give someone a ride. Deliver him somewhere. What if I already did and failed? Here's the part that's really messing with my head. I think this thing wants to be noticed, that it needs a driver. It doesn't just show up randomly. It waits for someone with enough curiosity, someone willing to push a little too far, ignore a few too many red flags. And then it climbs in. And you don't even realize you've agreed to something until it's too late. I keep replaying that moment in the car, when he said, "You picked me up because they told you to." I brushed it off as weird rambling, but now I think he meant it literally. Like the app or whatever's behind it chose me, like I was being tested. Maybe I failed. Or maybe I passed. I don't know which would be worse. Last night, I slept in my car. I didn't mean to. I was sitting there, engine off, just thinking, and I guess I dozed off. At 3:14 a.m., I woke up. The car was ice cold. My rear-view mirror had been tilted slightly, just enough that I could see my own eyes, but they didn't look like mine. I reached for the door handle and paused when I saw the cracked phone. It was back in the glove box. I hadn't touched it since throwing it away 2 towns over. And on the screen, one new message. Ready when you are. I shut the glove box and started the car. And now I'm writing this from the parking lot of an old gas station outside city limits. I don't know why I came here. It just felt right, or expected. I've got half a tank of gas. My phone's at 80%. And there's a man standing under the streetlight across the road. He hasn't moved in 10 minutes. I think he's waiting for me to unlock the doors. I didn't unlock the doors. I sat there, both hands on the steering wheel, my foot hovering over the brake, heart thudding like a drum beat in my throat. The guy under the streetlight just stood there, staring. Or maybe not staring, I couldn't see his eyes from this distance, but I could feel it. That heavy pressure, like I was under a spotlight and he was waiting for a cue. I kept telling myself to start the car, just leave, floor it, don't look back, but I didn't move. It was like my limbs forgot how to respond to me, like I wasn't completely in control anymore. It was the cold, maybe. The air had this wet bite to it, like it had rained hours ago and everything still clung to that damp weight. The windows fogged slightly from my breath, and I wiped a circle clear with my sleeve. He was still there, still unmoving. That made 2 of us. And then he did move. 1 step forward. That's all. but it felt like a decision had been made. I finally broke out of it, turned the key, threw the car into reverse, and backed out of the lot faster than I should have. Tires skidded a little, and for a second I thought I'd clipped something, but when I checked the rear view, it was just shadows. Or maybe not. I didn't wait to find out. I drove for almost an hour, no destination, just moving. I turned off the GPS, turned off the music, drove until I didn't recognize any of the signs, took random exits, followed roads just to lose myself. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every now and then I'd glance at the rear view, half expecting to see someone in the back seat again. Sometimes I thought I caught a glimpse of something, just a shift of shadow, the suggestion of movement. But every time I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. I finally pulled off at a rest stop, one of those older ones with vending machines from a different decade and bathrooms that make you consider holding it in. I sat on a bench outside and stared up at the sky. I couldn't tell you what I was thinking, really. Everything was tangled, a million half-thoughts and questions. Why me? Why now? Was there a pattern? Was I supposed to do something? Or was this punishment for something I didn't even remember doing? Then my phone buzzed. No notification this time, just a buzzing like a text that didn't show up. I checked it anyway, mostly out of habit. There was a new message. You're going the wrong way. That's it. No name, no number. And that's when I noticed something else. My rideshare app was open again. I swear on everything, I didn't open it. I deleted it. Twice. But there it was. And it had a route already set. Starting point, me. Destination, unlisted. And underneath the route line was a little blinking icon, a passenger. No name, no details, just the word. Noah. Again. I stared at it for a long time. I don't even know why. It was like watching something slowly catch fire and not doing anything about it. You can't look away, even when you should. Eventually I got back in the car. I didn't start it right away, just sat there, hand on the keys, trying to steady my breathing. I told myself I wasn't going to follow the route. But I did. I don't know if I chose to or if something chose for me. It's a blurry line now. The road it took me down wasn't on any map I'd seen before. Long stretches of cracked pavement, the kind with grass pushing through. No signs, no lights, just tree after tree, pressing in closer with each mile. I was maybe 15 minutes into the drive when I realized the GPS arrow was gone. Just the line now, a road to nowhere. And that's when I started hearing it again. Breathing. Not loud, just faint, like someone was sitting behind me trying not to be heard. But it was there. I turned the music up, hoping I could drown it out, but that only made it worse somehow. Like the sound had learned to hide underneath the noise. I pulled over. I needed out of the car, out of this story, out of whatever this was. I flung open the door and stepped into the dark. No lights anywhere, not even stars, just pitch-black trees and the hum of the engine behind me. And silence. I turned to look at the car and the passenger door was open. Not wide, just slightly, enough to see that it had been closed before. I didn't hear it open, didn't hear anything, but now it was ajar. and that was enough to spike the adrenaline in my throat. I walked around to check. Nothing. Back seat was empty. But the seatbelt buckled again. That was it. That was the moment I broke. I slammed the door, got back in the driver's seat, and screamed into the steering wheel. Not even words, just noise. A raw, panicked attempt to push the fear out of my body. When I looked up, the dashboard clock read 3:14 a.m. Every damn time. Something shifted then. I don't know how to explain it. The air inside the car thickened. The windows fogged instantly, like I was in a freezer. And in the rearview mirror, I saw movement. I didn't want to look, but I did. There was no one in the seat. But there was a shape in the mirror. Not solid, not clear, just wrong. Like the air had folded. And then I heard it. That same voice, dry and low, whispering from the back. You're almost there. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The car was suddenly freezing, and all I could see was that mirror, that shape, that thing that had once been a man. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe seconds, maybe longer. But then it stopped. No voice, no fog, just silence. And the sound of a new notification. My phone screen lit up. Trip complete. Underneath a single message. Thank you for driving, Noah. And then everything closed. The app, the route, the GPS. It was like nothing had ever been there. I sat in that car until daylight, shaking, staring at the empty seat beside me, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. I think I finished the job. I don't know what that means. Not really. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't being watched. At least not by him. Still, I haven't opened the glove box. Not since that night. I'm afraid there might be a new name inside. I didn't open the glove box for 3 weeks. Not once. Not even when I needed my registration after getting pulled over for a busted taillight. I gave the cop my license, smiled, apologized for not being able to find the paperwork, and drove away with a warning. The whole time, my hand hovered near the latch, but I couldn't do it. I was terrified that I'd see another phone, or a name written on old paper. Maybe something worse, something that didn't belong to me at all. After what happened that night after Noah, I needed to believe it was over. I needed to believe I'd closed whatever door I'd somehow opened. And for a while, it felt like I had. The app never came back, not even once. No more strange messages, no 3:14 a.m. wake-ups, no more open doors or whispered words or footsteps outside my apartment. Nothing. It was quiet. Not the eerie kind of quiet, not the something's about to happen kind, just peace. I started sleeping again. I deleted every rideshare-related app and changed my number. I moved to a new place across town, got a job working security for a storage facility. Night shift still but stationary, locked gates, no strangers getting into my car, no destinations to follow. I even started going to therapy. I didn't tell my therapist everything, how could I? I mean, who would believe me? but I told her enough about the ride, about how it felt, about how afraid I'd been of things I couldn't explain. She listened. She didn't interrupt, and after a while, I started to feel like I had my feet on the ground again. I still thought about Noah. Not every day, but enough. I'd catch myself looking at the rear view when I was alone in the car, or checking the dash clock out of habit, but nothing ever happened. Eventually, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, it really was over. Until last Tuesday. I was doing inventory checks in one of the back units at work. Big metal containers, mostly filled with old furniture and boxes no one ever comes to claim. Most of the time it's boring, but I like the quiet. That night, I was cataloging the lock codes when I found something taped to the inside of one of the unit doors. It was a receipt, just like the one I'd found on my dashboard. But this one had no name, just a time, 3:14 a.m., and one word scribbled across the top, almost too light to see: passenger. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. My hands started shaking, but not from cold. Someone had been there. Someone knew where I worked. And maybe they weren't done with me after all. But then something else hit me. The handwriting. It wasn't the same. This one was sloppier, sharper. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it neatly and slipped it into my pocket. I went back through the storage logs for the last month, found out that unit had recently been rented just for a week, paid in cash, no real name attached, just initials. J.W. Jason? I hadn't heard from him since he said he was going for a drive. That was over a month ago. I tried his phone again, straight to voicemail. I started digging, reached out to a few mutual friends. One of them said Jason had dropped off the grid, left town maybe, told people he needed space. No one had actually seen him, not since the night he disappeared. I think he picked someone up. I think he became the driver. That's how it works, right? That's what I started to understand. The ride ends when it's passed on, when the next driver takes the wheel, when someone else picks up the fare. That's why it left me alone. Because it wasn't about me anymore. It had found someone else. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or sick to my stomach. I kept the receipt, put it in a drawer with the other one, the first one. They sit there now, side by side, proof, I guess. If I ever forget it happened, if I ever need to remember how close I got. I don't drive strangers anymore, not for money, not for favors, not even when friends beg. I sold the old car and got a new one. No ride history, no connection. I still check the back seat every night. Still wake up sometimes at 3:14 a.m., sweating, heart pounding, even when nothing's there. But I'm here. I'm alive. And I think that matters. I don't know what it was. I don't know if Noah was a ghost, or a curse, or something worse. But I do know this. It wanted to be remembered. That's why it kept leaving traces, notes, receipts, that weird fog in the car. The ride was never about getting somewhere, it was about passing through, taking something with it, leaving something behind. Maybe I finished the job. Maybe I didn't. but it's not my ride anymore. It belongs to someone else now. If you're reading this, if this somehow sounds familiar, if you've seen the same route pop up on your app, or found a cracked phone in your glove box, or if your dashboard clock freezes at the same time every night, don't accept the ride. Lock your doors. And for the love of God, never look in the rearview mirror.